Chapter 966. The air suddenly fell silent. Chiu Shan could clearly feel that everyone's eyes on him had changed. It was clear these people had already guessed what he was thinking. Since this was the case, there was no need for him to push them. They naturally knew what to do. As expected, just as Chiu Shan finished speaking, a cultivator spoke up. Zhuohan's true identity and whether or not the treasure exists can only be confirmed with our own eyes. That's right. Fellow Taoist Qinyu, you should give us an explanation. Or perhaps you want to use the treasure alone to open a channel into the abyss. Another cultivator coldly sneered, and Mo Yuan furrowed her eyebrows. After obtaining the inheritance of light, her strength had greatly increased. Li Hongye was able to sense the strength of everyone else's cultivation, so she could also clearly sense it. At this time, the three people who spoke up had obscure auras. After carefully probing them, there was a sense of dread in their hearts. They were definitely extremely strong. With these three people taking the lead to speak up, even if they dreaded the strength that she and Qinyu had revealed, they didn't mind pushing the boat with the current and agreeing. If that happened, then whether or not Qinyu had a treasure wouldn't matter. He would be pushed to the opposite side of everyone else. And Mo Yuan's eyes flashed with a cold light. She swept her eyes over Chiu Shan and the others. These three old fellows were ruthless and decisive. But even if she could guess their thoughts, it was useless in the current situation. What should she do? Qinyu sighed inwardly. He thought that after living for so long, their skin had become thicker. They would immediately turn hostile to you, clearly wanting to mess with you. Moreover, they had grasped the perfect timing, so there was no way to resist. If there was a chance, he would definitely hold down these three old things and beat them to the ground. He would let them know that a loose tongue can cause trouble. But now this thought changed. It was best to escape first. Compromising was a very practical survival technique. Without absolute confidence, stubbornness would only lead to death. Qinyu said, "It is reasonable that you don't want to believe me, but I have no other way to prove my innocence." He looked around. Without waiting for those who were eager to speak, he continued, "But perhaps I really can find a way to enter the abyss." Everyone's gazes changed. Qinyu and Mo Yuan had revealed great strength, so they didn't mind working together to eliminate the two of them first. This would reduce the number of competitors, but compared to entering the abyss, this wasn't as important. After all, if they couldn't even enter the abyss, there was no meaning in dealing with the two. Moreover, even if there was a treasure, with so many people here, how could everyone have a share? It would still be taken by the strongest people. Chiu Shan frowned, sensing everyone's change. He looked at Qinyu, thinking that this junior was quite smart. He had resolved the dangerous situation with just a few words. Although he wanted to eliminate Qinyu and Mo Yuan and Chiu Shan, he didn't want to waste too much of his strength. Since the situation was not, he could only change. With his thoughts settled, Chiu Shan smiled and said, "If fellow Taoist Qinyu can really find a way to enter the abyss, I will be eternally grateful. Naturally, I won't have any distracting thoughts about treasures." He paused for a moment before continuing. Although he was still smiling, his words were filled with an unconcealable chill. "But if fellow Taoist Qinyu reveals any other signs, such as activating a treasure to enter the abyss, then don't blame me for being merciless. No matter how exquisite a treasure is in this world, there will always be a buffer before it can be activated. Although this buffer period is extremely short, it is more than enough for us to act." Another person coldly sneered. The threat was obvious. Qinyu cupped his hands together. "Thank you for the reminder. In order to express my sincerity, I will tell you the method ahead of time, and then I will be the first to try." He lifted a hand and pointed. "Everyone, look at the terrifying life forms that live in the depths of the blood plains. They are hungry and bloodthirsty, wishing that they could tear us apart and swallow us whole. But the truth is that they don't have the qualifications to enjoy our flesh and blood. To put it more bluntly, These blood plains life forms look fierce, and their fang mouths are actually channels that lead to the abyss. As long as we don't resist and are swallowed into their stomachs, when we open our eyes again, we will already be in the abyss. As his voice fell, everyone had strange complexions. Was this Chin Yu a madman? Or did he think that if he said this, they would all be obedient and listen to him and willingly send themselves to their deaths? However, these thoughts tumbled in their hearts, but they didn't say them out loud. This was because they swept their eyes over Qiu Shan and the others. After a brief moment of shock, these old monsters all had thoughtful looks on their faces. Qin Yu clapped his hands. I guarantee that everything I say is true. If you don't believe me, then you must watch carefully. He grabbed Hushan and held onto Mo Yuan with his other hand. Don't resist. Just relax. Bringing the two women with him, Qin Yu walked directly towards the abyss. He drew closer and closer to the blood plains life forms guarding the edge of the abyss. Roar! With a loud roar, a blood plains life form with crimson scales and pure black eyes opened its mouth wide, ruthlessly swallowing them. Hushan tensed. Light burst out from Mo Yuan's body, but in the next moment it was extinguished. In this dangerous moment, although they were terrified, they still chose to believe in Qin Yu's judgment. A pungent smell rushed towards them. They could even see the saliva that was secreted between the fangs. At this time, a swallowing strength appeared without warning, wrapping around Qin Yu and the other two people who had fallen into its mouth. With a loud hum, they vanished from sight. This scene was clearly seen by everyone. As they cried out in alarm, their eyes brightened. It was true. It was actually true. These blood plains life forms seemed terrifying and invincible, but they were actually mediums that could directly enter the abyss. If they didn't see this with their own eyes, who would believe it? Darkness fell in front of them. A powerful, binding strength descended. Not only their mortal bodies, but even their souls were suppressed, making them lose control of their cultivation. In the pitch-black darkness, all perception was blocked. The fear in one's heart was magnified to an infinite degree. As Hushan and Mo Yuan were feeling helpless, Qin Yu's calm voice rang out in their ears. Don't resist. Leave it to me. As time passed, the binding strength became increasingly strong. Even the two women found it difficult to breathe. Then, Qin Yu's shout echoed in their ears once more. Zila! With a light sound, it was like a thick piece of cloth was torn apart by a formidable strength. The binding strength around them suddenly vanished. In the next moment, the darkness in front of them dissipated. A dim light shined into their eyes. Although it was weak, it still made Hushan and Mo Yuan's eyes ache. It was like they had been imprisoned in this darkness for hundreds of years. Mo Yuan's cultivation was stronger, but the first to recover was Hushan. She blinked and looked up. She cried out, "We really came in." Above their heads, there was a thin white line. It was unknown how far away they were, but as far as their eyes could see, everything was pitch black. That white line was the entrance to the abyss. Now, they were in the deepest depths of the abyss. Mo Yuan glanced at Qin Yu. The closer she was to him, the more she could feel how mysterious and powerful he was. She took a deep breath and said in a soft voice, "I originally thought you were lying to them." Qin Yu lightly said, "I already said that there was no falsehood in what I said before. The giant mouths of the primitive blood tribe creatures are indeed the passages leading to the abyss. However, you and I have already broken free from the passage halfway." Hushan blinked. "Uncle Qin, what is at the end of the channel?" Qin Yu shook his head. "I don't know." Mo Yuan said, "You really don't know?" Qin Yu nodded. He paused for a moment and said, "But my intuition tells me that there might be some small troubles at the end of the channel. I hope that those who enter have the ability to ensure their own safety." Mo Yuan suddenly felt that the Qin Yu in front of her had become more real. So he was also an ordinary person. "Let's go." Qin Yu glanced at the bottomless abyss below. He reached out and grabbed the two of them, sinking downwards. The two women were behind him. They didn't notice the dark golden light that occasionally flashed in the depths of Qin Yu's eyes. Mo Yuan was a bit nervous. Qin Yu, if we go down like this, will there be any dangers? Qin Yu said, not too long ago, this place was indeed filled with dangers, but now. He smiled. There are already 2 pathfinders who have cleared away the obstacles for us. With the delirium shattering eye, he could clearly see the traces left behind by those who passed through. The most numerous traces were the power of blood. They revealed despair, destruction, and cruelty, tearing apart the endless darkness and opening up a path to the bottom of the abyss. If it weren't for this, Qin Yu didn't doubt that with his current cultivation, he would have been instantly swallowed up by the darkness as soon as he stepped into the abyss. The second aura was sword intent, sharp, tyrannical, unexcelled in the world. It was as if even the heavens and earth could be cut apart with a single sword strike. It was clear that these scattered sword intents that cut apart the remaining dangers in the darkness came from the terrifying sword cultivator who had stepped into the abyss not too long ago. These 2 people had pushed their way through, thus making the path into the abyss incomparably safe. Even though there were a few things he missed, Qin Yu was able to avoid them with the delirium shattering eye. This abyss looked bottomless, but its true depth was even more astonishing. Qin Yu pulled the 2 women down without stopping. 2 hours passed, and he didn't know how far he had gone, but he still couldn't see the bottom of the abyss. But along the way, the traces of the power of blood and the scattered and sharp sword intents proved that he hadn't gone the wrong way. A sharp light flashed in Qin Yu's eyes. If he wasn't wrong, then it was impossible to speculate about the space within this abyss using ordinary methods. It looked like an abyss, but the size of its interior was likely comparable to that of an entire great world. Qin Yu took a deep breath, a dignified expression on his face. Through the slumbering consciousness of the woman within Hushan's body, he already knew that the matters within the abyss weren't simple. This was a formidable existence that controlled the power of blood and descended from the heavens, cleaving apart the darkness and slaughtering their way into the abyss. The remnant traces of blood and incomparably formidable aura were enough for Qin Yu to perceive their boundary. This was a power that surpassed the divine realm and reached an even higher realm. Without a doubt, this was an original God realm expert. The sword cultivator following behind them, in terms of realm, couldn't compare to the original God realm, but the strength he could erupt with wasn't much weaker. Through sensing the strength of the sword intents, Qin Yu could get a clear answer. And the chaos wasn't just limited to this. From the blood shadow that had fought with Hushan's consciousness, Qin Yu could almost come up with a frightening conjecture. According to the information that everyone had received, the original God realm expert that had died and had yet to disperse its origin wasn't truly dead. And in addition to the consciousness in Hushan's body, the situation was complex and extremely dangerous. Even though they had smoothly entered the abyss, Qin Yu didn't relax at all. Instead, he became increasingly solemn. His current cultivation was much stronger than before, but if he were to be placed in this abyss, he would only be considered a slightly stronger ant. Any one of the 4 people listed on the list could easily kill him. Moreover, who knew if there were other formidable characters that he hadn't sensed yet in the dark? After all, that powerful sword cultivator who had suddenly appeared and killed his way into the abyss hadn't been in Qin Yu's range of perception. Qin Yu's thoughts raced, and then he suddenly said, Mo Yuan, you've received the inheritance of light. Your future is limitless. You don't need to follow us and take risks. He paused and then continued. To be honest, if I hadn't promised Xiaoyu that I would try my best to keep her alive, and now because of Hushan, I'm afraid I would have turned around and left immediately. The situation in the abyss is far more dangerous than you know. If we aren't careful or have bad luck, we will be buried there. Mo Yuan shook her head without hesitation. I want to go down. Qin Yu looked at her. He could feel the determination in her eyes. He hesitated for a moment and then suppressed the thought of persuading her. At this moment, a sword cry resounded. Even though it was an endless distance away, it still pierced through his eardrums and reached the deepest part of his mind. Qin Yu stuffily coughed, and his complexion paled. And what was most terrifying was that blood flowed out from the corners of his lips. It was just a sword cry that came from far away, but it had actually injured him and wounded his mind. It was that terrifying sword cultivator. He had attacked. Qin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed the tumbling in his chest. He looked down at the abyss below. Although it was still pitch black, he could feel a raging annihilation aura in this darkness. These fluctuations were so terrifying that if he were to touch them in the slightest, he would be turned to ashes. Shua, behind Qin Yu, Hushan closed her eyes and then opened them again. Her aura greatly changed, and Mo Yuan stiffened. She felt as if she were standing at the mouth of a volcano, and at any moment she could be burned to ashes by the gushing magma. Qin Yu hesitated for a moment. Then he let go and pulled Mo Yuan back a step. Hu Shan looked at the two of them. There was no emotion in her eyes, only endless indifference. This day has finally arrived. As she spoke, she stepped forwards. Like a drop of water fusing into ink, she stepped into the darkness and vanished from their sight. Chapter 9:67. Mo Yuan paled, and her voice trembled. It wasn't that her mind wasn't strong enough, but that Hushan's aura just now had left her feeling endless fear and despair. What is going on? After a brief silence, Qin Yu said, "This is one of the reasons I warned you not to continue entering the abyss. Hushan is slumbering within her, and her other consciousness is what you saw just now." He took a deep breath. "So this is your last chance. Do you want to continue?" Mo Yuan looked at Qin Yu, hesitation on her face. "I said before that if it weren't for the fact that I had no choice but to enter the abyss, I would have already turned around and left. These are my true thoughts. Moreover, if I were alone, my chances of survival would be greater." Mo Yuan let out a breath. "I understand." She suddenly stepped forwards and hugged Qin Yu. "Promise me that you will survive. I am still waiting to bring you back to the Imperial City to see my father." Qin Yu smiled. "Of course. I will do my best to survive." After a brief hug, he took a step back. Without saying anything more, his figure held downwards. At the bottom of the abyss, a vast and endless distance away, darkness surged up and was immediately torn apart. Hushan stepped forwards. Her aura was vast and boundless, instantly attracting the attention of the 5 eyeballs here. Murong Chioga's pupils shrank. He could feel a terrifying aura of destruction coming from her. His thoughts stirred and he slowly drew back. Since her current goal was the fallen origin divinity slumbering in the abyss, he naturally didn't mind watching from the sidelines. If he could reap the benefits in the end, that would be for the best. Lang Yen grasped a sword and stood there, sword intent thick around him. As he breathed through his nose and mouth, space constantly collapsed. His eyes fell on Hushan. Deep in his icy eyes, there was a trace of excitement. Putting away his sword, Lang Yen knelt down on one knee. He lowered his arrogant head and respectfully said, "Teacher, I finally see you again." Hushan lightly said, "Very good. It seems my teachings in the past weren't in vain." She lifted a hand and pointed forwards. "Since you have thoroughly comprehended it, then attack with me and end everything." Bang! A great sun suddenly appeared. It shined with radiant light, but the feeling it gave off was completely different from the light inheritance that Mo Yuan had obtained. This great sun released light, but it didn't have the slightest bit of warmth or calmness. There was only endless sharpness and destruction, as if it could cut the entire world into countless fragments. Hu Shan raised her hand and made a grabbing motion. The sun fell into her hand and quickly elongated, turning into a real great sun sword. Lang Yen stood up respectfully and raised his hands above his head. Suddenly, a full moon appeared, cold and shining. What was similar to the sun was that this full moon was extremely cold, but it wasn't hazy or graceful at all. It was still extremely sharp. The full moon condensed into a sword and fell into Lan Yan's hand. The next moment, all the darkness in the depths of the abyss shattered and was forced back by the intertwined power of the sun and moon. The fifth eye was truly just an eyeball. It was barely wrapped around by a thin layer of dark red flesh. There was a slash mark on it, and as the flesh squirmed, it continued to grow. But in the next moment, it ruptured, causing the slash mark to be unable to heal. Thinking about it, the terrifying sword cry that crossed the endless distance just now was the origin of this slash mark. However, from another perspective, if an eyeball wrapped in a thin layer of flesh and blood was able to block Lin Yan's sword, just how tyrannical was the master of this eyeball? If he was in a perfect state, then in the blink of an eye, the entire world would have been destroyed. Sun and moon coexist. Hushan icily said. She raised the great sun, sword in her hand. At the same time, Lan Yan pointed the full moon sword at the eyeball. Rumble, rumble. Boundless strength roared and tumbled like endless waves. A sun and moon phantom appeared at the ends of the abyss. It can destroy the world. After Hushan said the last 3 words, the shadows of the sun and moon exploded with blinding light. However, this light didn't scatter in all directions. Instead, it gathered together like a sharp arrow that shot towards the deepest depths of the abyss, towards the eyeball that floated in midair. Murong Chioga's complexion changed. He rapidly drew back, his eyes filled with shock. Although he had already guessed that Hushan possessed formidable strength, only after seeing it with his own eyes did he realize just how terrifying she was. That sword cultivator strength could only be considered a slight threat, but after joining forces with her, he could erupt with such a terrifying might. Sun and moon coexist to destroy the world. This wasn't nonsense. If this strike really came from the highest heavens and crashed into the earth, then it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it could destroy the heavens and earth. Luckily, he wasn't her enemy. Otherwise, if he faced this strike head-on, even if he didn't die, he would have shed several layers of skin. Before he finished thinking this, Murong Chioga's complexion changed. He looked up at the sphere of blood floating above his head. Now a shock spread out from within. His control over the sphere of blood was instantly blocked. In the next moment, the sphere of blood held out. Bang! There was an earth-shaking explosion. One could faintly hear the cries of despair of countless living beings facing death. The sphere of blood forcefully collided with the sun and moon strike and directly shattered. Endless blood energy evaporated, and only half of its original volume remained. Murong Chioga seemed as if he had suffered a heavy blow. Blood gushed out from every orifice of his head. What was even more terrifying was that countless cracks appeared on the surface of his body, similar to the cracks that appeared when porcelain failed. These cracks opened up slightly, revealing the dark red, crystal-like flesh underneath. Drops of translucent, crystal-like blood seeped out of them like crimson dewdrops. I played with birds all day and thought everything was in my control, but I never imagined that I would fall into someone else's trap and have my eyes pecked out by a bird. Murong Chioga bitterly smiled. This time, I've suffered a great loss. He had used a secret technique to completely fuse his aura with the sphere of blood. Only then could he borrow its strength to erupt with a strength that surpassed his limits. Now that the sphere of blood was struck by the sun and moon strike, it was the same as him forcefully withstanding this terrifying attack. Both sides shared weal and woe. Pa! With a light sound, Murong Chioga's entire body shattered. Like a mirror that had fallen to the ground, it shattered into countless pieces. But besides the blood that flowed out from the wound caused by the sun and moon strike, not a single drop of blood flowed out. In the next moment, the fragments of his body began to melt, fusing together like clay. They were kneaded by invisible hands, turning into a Murong Chioga. His body was perfect without a single wound. Like this, he appeared naked in front of everyone. He lifted his hand, and a robe appeared, covering himself. Morong Choga bitterly smiled once more. What a great loss! What a great loss! Disintegrating himself and then being reborn. This was a powerful life-saving method that he had obtained after swallowing a powerful enemy in the past. Not only could this secret technique dissolve all wounds, but it could also sever all connections with the sphere of blood. But all of this couldn't be done without a price. Hum! The remnant sphere of blood emitted a humming sound. It rapidly extended, revealing a figure. It was the great Chu Emperor, Chu Tianpeng, who had been tricked by Morong Choga. The moment he opened his eyes, fear appeared in them. His aura moved, and he was about to leave, but he froze in the next moment. It was like an invisible cage had appeared in the void, suppressing him within. Chu Tianpeng's face twisted. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. But anyone could clearly feel that he was withstanding an unimaginable pain. After several breaths of time, the light in Chu Tianpeng's eyes shattered and dissipated. Finally, they turned into emptiness and deathly stillness. But at this time he opened his mouth to speak. His tone was flat, without any fluctuations, as if he were a shell that was being controlled by someone. In the past, when I learned that you hadn't died, I expected this day to come. Naturally, I made some preparations. If you want to destroy me, it won't be so simple. Hu Shan looked at Morong Choga. His complexion changed, and he hurriedly said, I think you should be able to see that I was tricked. If you don't want to die here, then destroy his eyes with all your strength. After speaking, Hu Shan lifted her hand and pointed between her eyebrows. Golden flames gushed out from her body, recklessly burning, but they didn't release any heat. Leng Yan coughed. The silver flames wrapped around him. He frowned and said in a low voice, Teacher, do not forget your promise to him. Destroying him is the entire meaning of your existence. Hu Shan lightly said. Leng Yan took a deep breath. This disciple understands. He shouted out loud, and the silver flames around him burned even more fiercely. Bang, bang. At this time, the shadows of the sun and moon released their auras, rising to an astonishing degree. Guided by an invisible strength, they approached each other and revolved around each other. The sun and moon moved together. Space suddenly twisted and blurred. Then, the phantom of a towering palace slowly appeared. The palace was built around a great lake. One could hear the sound of clear spring water flowing into the lake. A figure walked along the shore. As it walked, it was like a stone falling into water. The image became even more blurry, and it was impossible to distinguish whether it was a man or a woman. One could only see that it was holding a long sword and slowly walking forward. From time to time, it would stop and look at the lake as if it were pondering some difficult problem. The floating eye revealed a dignified expression. Chu Tianpeng, who was only an empty shell, howled and crazily rushed towards this phantom. At this time, the phantom that appeared in the distorted space suddenly lifted its hand and casually slashed forward. Bang! A monstrous sword intent instantly arrived. It was like the heavens were collapsing and the earth was sinking, covering everything within. Chu Tianpeng, who was rushing towards the distorted space, was cut in half. The terrifying sword intent that could destroy everything continued to swallow his body. Finally, he turned to ashes. With just a single sword strike, all traces of His Majesty Great Chu's first emperor in this world were completely erased, leaving nothing behind. Moreover, what was most terrifying was that this sword strike came from the phantom that appeared in the distorted space. Although Chu Tianping's strength had been greatly reduced after being struck by the sun and moon, and his divine sense had been erased, leaving behind only an empty shell, no matter what, he was still at the original God realm. A phantom in the image had casually struck out and killed him. If one didn't see it with their own eyes, who would believe it? Puff! Leng Yan spat out a mouthful of blood, his face turning deathly pale. The light in Hu Shan's eyes also dimmed. It was clear that in order to support the phantom strike, it had taken a terrifying toll. Qin Yu's eyes widened. He looked at the vague phantom in the distorted space, and a piece of information was directly imprinted in his mind. Wherever a divine being passes through, the rules of the world will conceal it, shielding it from the eyes of mortals and making it impossible for them to see its movements. But if one obtained permission, they could mark the divine phantom in their mind and consume their own strength to summon the memories into the world, borrowing the power of the divine. This was the divine mark. After looking through it, great waves rose up in Qin Yu's mind. Even with his willpower, he was momentarily absent-minded. Without a doubt, what he was seeing right now was the image of Hushan summoning the memories into his mind. Divine essence cultivators were the strongest existences that Qin Yu had come into contact with so far, but a vague figure that existed in his memories could cut them down with a sword and completely annihilate them, leaving no trace of them in the world. Then, just how formidable was this vague figure that was called a divine being? That boundary was something that even Qin Yu couldn't imagine. The disparity between them was like an ant and a divine dragon that reached the highest heavens. Perhaps with just a glance he would be destroyed. Intuition told Qin Yu that he absolutely could not attempt to touch this divine existence. But the impulse that came from the depths of his soul completely crushed all reason. It was like he had a reason to do this, even if he didn't know what this reason was. In the depths of Qin Yu's eyes, a dark golden light shined with an unprecedented brilliance. The strength of the delusion breaker had risen to its peak. Then his gaze fell on the blurry figure in the image. The moment his eyes fell, Qin Yu's body stiffened. Or it was more accurate to say that even his soul froze. An invisible strength arrived, covering him within. For instance, if a spring breeze blew across the surface of a lake, Qin Yu would be completely crushed to powder. Chapter 968. Within his soul space, the purple moon and blue sun rose in the east and set in the west. The sun and moon force field they formed suddenly released a fluctuation. An invisible strength suddenly descended from the depths of darkness. It changed from the cold winter snow to the gentle breeze of a spring day. All of the feelings of danger, destruction, and terror completely vanished. All that was left over was an instinctive feeling of intimacy. A surprised voice sounded out in Qin Yu's ears. It was a woman, her voice warm and gentle. In the next moment, the image that appeared in the distorted space became incomparably clear. It was like Qin Yu himself had been placed within it. The palace stretched on endlessly, and there was an incomparably huge lake. The clear water in the lake was almost transparent, and there were red and white koi fish happily shaking their heads and wagging their tails, constantly jumping out of the water to greet the woman who was walking in the shade of the trees by the shore. She stopped and turned around. It was impossible to describe her beauty, because at this moment Qin Yu's entire mind was drawn to her eyes. These were eyes that shined like stars in the heavens. They seemed to contain the most beautiful scenery in the world, causing one's mind to be lost in them. As her eyes fell on Qin Yu, she was a bit surprised. She looked him up and down several times and then revealed a faint smile. I never thought that after such a long time I would still be able to find someone who is fated with me. But what a pity. Your cultivation is too weak. She gently shook her head. Qin Yu immediately felt the distance between him and the world around him become distant. The scenery around him and the woman's figure rapidly blurred, as if he would be rejected at any moment. His instincts gave birth to an unwilling thought. If he left like this, he would miss out on some unimaginable lucky chance. But it was clear that this wasn't something that Qin Yu would change. Just as he felt he was about to leave, the woman suddenly lifted a hand and grasped forward. The feeling of rejection suddenly vanished. In the next moment, Qin Yu felt his chest tighten as he was pulled in front of her. The woman leaned over and carefully looked at him. What an unfortunate little fellow. But if it weren't for the misfortune of the past, how could you be here today? Every peck and every drink has its own destiny. This is the most mysterious and mystical aspect of fate. She reached out a hand and pinched Qin Yu's face. Then she patted his head. All right, since you are worthy, I will reluctantly accept you as my disciple. But this status will have to wait until you have a high enough cultivation before you can obtain it. Now you have to leave. After all, this world is not a place where you should appear. As he pushed outwards, he felt as if he had fallen into a bottomless abyss. His body tensed, and he discovered that his consciousness had returned. What just happened? Qin Yu touched his face. He could still feel some residual warmth on his fingertips. No, there was also a faint fragrance. However, no matter how hard he tried, his memories were blurry, as if they were shrouded by a layer of fog. But faintly, Qin Yu could remember a pair of extremely beautiful eyes that seemed to hide the entire starry sky within the vast vault of heaven. Qin Yu wasn't sure what had happened, but he was sure that this was related to the divine mark he had peeked into. Perhaps he had experienced something just now, but because he wasn't allowed to remember it, his memories were sealed. The divine imprint was actually so powerful. Moreover, Qin Yu was well aware that the so-called divine imprint was nothing more than an image left in the memories of others. Then, what level was the strength and boundary of that person who was called divine? Qin Yu didn't dare to think about it, nor could he imagine it. Perhaps it was something that only existed in the legends. When one opened their eyes, the world was bright, and when they closed their eyes, the world was covered in an eternal night. As Qin Yu's heart shook, the image that appeared in the distorted space distorted. The figure walking along the lakeside lifted its hand and slashed out a second sword strike. The eye that floated at the lowest point of the abyss suddenly enlarged. Darkness swallowed everything, turning the entire eye pure black. In the next moment, endless blood-red light gushed out from nothingness, gathering above the eye. It wildly contracted and condensed, forming a blood moon. Bang! A terrifying sword slash descended. The part of the blood moon that came into contact with it instantly shattered and dissipated. Then, from its perfect state, it turned into a crescent moon. Within the sun-moon force field, the slumbering silver moon sword intent seemed to sense some sort of aura and instantly awoke. The cry of a sword reverberated through Qin Yu's mind, giving him an impulse to stimulate his sword intent and slash at this blood moon. He bit down on the tip of his tongue. A sweet taste filled his mouth, and his eyes brightened. With a thought, the purple moon and blue sun within his soul space began to move a little faster. The aura of the sun-moon force field was strengthened. Only then was it able to barely isolate the aura from the outside world, allowing the silver moon sword intent to calm down. Before, when Hushan and Lung Yan attacked, Qin Yu had felt a familiar feeling. Now, as he saw this familiar blood moon, this familiarity became even more intense. Could it be that this blood moon was that blood moon and the silver moon sword intent was the silver moon sword intent he comprehended? Then this sword cultivator in the Imperial City, Myriad Sword Mountain single-armed Elder Tang, had come to pay a special visit and mentioned an old secret of the sect. Could it be that this person was the little marshal, granduncle that he mentioned? As Qin Yu was thinking, the seemingly forgotten Morong Choga suddenly attacked. An original divinity was still an original divinity. Although he had suffered a great loss before, when he attacked now, his might couldn't be underestimated. His target was the eye that had temporarily fallen into stillness in order to control the blood moon. As a great Tao plunderer who had reached the original divinity realm, Morong Choga had swallowed countless cultivators in his life, and those that had the qualifications to arouse his interest were naturally outstanding figures amongst cultivators. This allowed him to obtain countless formidable methods. For instance, the method he used to consume his strength to repair his wounds. For instance, the starfall art that Morong Choga used. Above the abyss, the thick darkness that had been torn apart and then condensed back together once more began to emit powerful fluctuations. In the next moment, the darkness began to burn red, like an iron ingot in a furnace. Bang, bang! Huge, blazing meteors shot out from the center, bringing with them an unstoppable force that could not be stopped. Before they arrived, the temperature in the air began to rise at an astonishing speed. Every breath felt like it was burning. At this time, a blood shadow walked out from the blood moon. Its 4 limbs were on the ground, and its body was extremely small. It looked up at the countless burning meteors and opened its mouth. Its neck thickened until it was 10 times the size of its body. It emitted a heaven-shaking roar. Space twisted. A terrifying strength crazily shook and tumbled within. Bang, bang! All the meteors that fell into it were like bubbles, directly bursting and dissipating. An icy voice sounded out from the short blood shadow. Although you can summon the divine mark, your strength is not at its peak. You cannot fully display the power of the divine image. If you want to kill me, you will need at least 10 sword strikes. But in your current state, can you support the divine image for 10 sword strikes? Even if you can your so-called disciple do it? Hu Shan was expressionless. No matter how much you say, don't even think of breaking my will. Today, you will perish and your consciousness will vanish forever. The short blood shadow sneered. I naturally know that it is impossible for you to be persuaded. So, these words weren't meant for you to listen to. He turned to look at Lung Yen. The reason you are here today is because of your own talent. This woman hasn't taught you anything. In order to help her take revenge, is it worth it to give up your life? Lung Yan's body shivered. The burning silver flames consumed his precious life force with every breath of time, and the amount was astonishing. This was a process where he could clearly feel his life force diminishing, and he was constantly approaching death. After a brief silence, he looked up. Teacher, you have bestowed me with the strength I possess today, and I am very grateful. But now I cannot die. I hope you can forgive me. Hu Shan frowned for a moment before immediately composing herself. This is a fate that was decided many years ago when you made that promise. You have no other choice. Haha. No, Yang Ri, you are wrong. Of course he can choose, because this is my world. The waning moon above the eye suddenly rose in brightness. At this moment, all the rules in the entire abyss were fiercely stirred and fell into chaos. Lung Yen coughed, and his face paled. As he spat out blood, the entangled sword intents of the sun and moon were immediately cut apart. The sun and moon shadows that revolved around each other instantly disintegrated, and the moon's shadow dissipated. Thus, the distorted space rapidly restored itself, and the scene that descended also disappeared. Yang Ri, you have lost. This is your fate. Even if you were able to barely escape into the heavens in the past, you are still destined to perish at my hands today. The blood shadow crazily laughed. And I will swallow you, as well as all the prey that intrudes into my world. With this strength, I can reconstruct my body and complete my resurrection. Lung Yan's complexion changed. Make an oath that you will let me go. Oath? To a blood moon cultivator. Such an oath simply doesn't exist. Moreover, you have already grasped the silver moon, sword intent. Swallowing you and Yang Ri will be the best tonic for me. Bang! A mass of blood-red light suddenly gushed out from nothingness. Like a giant mouth, it swallowed him. Lung Yen crazily swung his sword. Overbearing sword intent wreaked havoc, cutting open countless gaps in the blood-red light. But in the next moment, these gaps grew and mended. It's useless. Although your sword intent is strong enough, your boundary is too low. It is impossible for you to cut open my imprisonment. Little by little, you will melt and be absorbed, becoming a part of my body. The blood shadow that stepped out from the blood moon suddenly restrained all of its blood-red light, revealing its true appearance. It was surprisingly a miniature pig-like obum. But the luxurious golden robes it wore, the crown on its head was inlaid with countless gems, and the terrifying strength hidden within its body was enough to prove its identity. It was Emperor Obum, who lived in the imperial capital of Obum all year round and rarely appeared in front of others. This was Emperor Obum, one of the strongest existences in the world, alongside Great Chu's first emperor. At this time, Emperor Obum stretched out a hand, and the eyeball beneath the blood moon flew towards him. He held the eyeball and slowly pressed it against his own. The moment the two touched, a thin layer of flesh wrapped around the surface of the eyeball suddenly seemed to come alive. It stretched out crazily, and the ends stretched out like spikes. It dug out Emperor Obum's original eyeball, crushed it into a pool of mucus, and absorbed it cleanly. Then it drilled into the bloody hole. The flesh and blood rapidly grew and healed, replacing Emperor Obum's eye. Or, to be more precise, it returned to where it should have been in the first place. Emperor Obum blinked his eyes, as if adapting to the changes brought about by the return of this eyeball. He smiled and said, "Yongri, you are indeed very strong. So strong that even though I made many preparations, I still didn't have absolute confidence. So I prepared for the worst. Even if you destroy this place today, you will discover that I am still alive." Obum. The emperor straightened his body, and an unimaginably terrifying aura erupted from his body. "Now it is time to end everything. All of you will die here." He flicked his sleeves, and the blood moon soared into the sky. In an instant, it rushed out of the abyss. Scarlet moonlight sprinkled down, causing the bloody plain on the ground to seem as if it was covered in endless blood. Chapter 969. There was only a single blood moon, and it was incomplete, but it could illuminate the entire heaven, eradicating abyss. Under the influence of an unknown rule strength, as long as one was in this abyss, they could clearly see it. Naturally, they would be bathed in the blood-red moonlight. At this time, Qin Yu could confirm that the strange blood moon world he had fallen into was related to this terrifying original god and heaven eradicating abyss. Because at this time, the blood moon that illuminated the entire heaven eradicating abyss had the same aura as the one he had seen before. A cold and extreme cold aura seeped into his body through his pores. He could even hear the faint sound of his blood freezing into ice. And what was most terrifying was that as Qin Yu was illuminated by the blood moon, the feeling of being locked onto appeared once more. It was like this blood moon above his head was an eye. Now that it had opened, he could no longer hide. Qin Yu took a deep breath. His two hearts suddenly accelerated, pushing his blood vitality to circulate at an astonishing speed. At the same time, the sun and moon force field spread out, isolating him from the outside world. The feeling of being locked onto by Qin Yu weakened to the extreme. But this time he didn't know what the problem was, but he wasn't able to completely isolate it. Qin Yu's complexion paled. After several breaths of silence, a trace of understanding appeared in his heart. He had appeared several times in the perception of some unknown existence. He had already been captured and left behind traces in the world, like a fish swimming through water. Unless he could completely erase the traces he left behind, he would never be able to escape being locked onto. The shielding of the sun and moon force field could only reduce Qin Yu's traces to the lowest degree, delaying the time it would take for him to be locked onto. Simply put, he would inevitably face the great terror that came from behind the blood moon in the future. This was a truth that left one feeling despair. Even with Qin Yu's will, he still felt a bit panicked. But soon, Qin Yu had no choice but to focus his attention on the current situation. In the depths of the abyss, Emperor Ophum seemed to sense something. He suddenly looked up. Although he was still in a hidden state, Qin Yu knew that he had been discovered. Thinking about it, it should be related to the blood moon hanging high above his head. Emperor Ophum's eyes flashed with surprise. He never imagined that such a weak little fellow would be able to hide from him for so long. But soon he sensed a certain aura, and his eyes suddenly flashed with excitement and fanaticism. Qin Yu stepped forwards and shot into the skies without hesitation. In the next moment, the space where he had hidden himself collapsed. It was as if an invisible hand had grabbed him. If he hadn't reacted quickly, he would have been suppressed. "You can't escape." The deep voice rang in his ears, carrying with it some kind of strong will, directly penetrating his eardrums and blasting into his mind. Qin Yu stiffened. At this moment, he felt as if all his hopes had turned to dust. He nearly gave up on resisting. The jade egg trembled slightly. His mind suddenly contracted, and he immediately broke free from this gloomy mood. His eyes revealed shock, anger, and fear. With a deep roar, Qin Yu's flesh, blood, and bones began to emit explosive sounds. His speed immediately increased as he soared above the abyss. The emperor frowned. He never thought that Qin Yu would be able to break free from the interference of his will. After a moment of hesitation, he suppressed his thoughts of chasing him down. No matter how far this junior fled, as long as he was in heaven eradicating abyss, he would never be able to leave. Right now, the most important thing was to kill Yang Ri. At that time, everything would fall into his grasp. "Revive my slaves!" With a loud roar, the emperor pointed a finger at the blood moon. Its light immediately became brighter. Roar, roar. Loud roars tore through the darkness. Pale, white skeletons, beneath the light of the blood moon, seemed even more fierce and cruel. These giant skeletons that tore through the darkness and descended into the abyss were the blood origin life forms that had been guarding the entrance to the abyss. But now, none of their flesh and blood had been seen. But their auras were far more formidable than before. Without needing to move them, with loud roars, these summoned skeletons crazily rushed towards Hushan. She furrowed her brows, but her eyes were still extremely calm. It was like she was born without emotions. No matter what situation she faced, she could calmly deal with it. She lifted her hands, and endless light was released from her body. In the blink of an eye, a great sun appeared in the abyss. Trillions of beams of light erupted. Each one was an incomparably sharp sword that could easily cut apart everything. Beneath the light, bone beasts were torn apart into countless pieces that plummeted to the ground. The emperor laughed. "You should know that beneath the blood moon, my slaves have undying bodies. As for your remaining strength, just how long can you last? Yang Ri, today I will send you and your little sister to the netherworld to reunite." Mo Yuan's entire body shined with light. Even though she summoned all of her strength, she still couldn't completely resist the corrosion of the blood moon. An extremely colding aura pierced through her flesh and blood like needles and dissolved within her body. Mo Yuan didn't know what was happening beneath the abyss, but the sudden appearance of this blood moon was inevitably related to it. At this time, she could clearly feel her flesh and blood slowly freezing over. Her body gradually fell into a frozen state. But towards all of this, Mo Yuan was powerless to change it. She could only watch helplessly as she drew closer and closer to destruction. At this time, the darkness in front of her suddenly split apart and Qin Yu stepped out. At first glance, he could see Mo Yuan's current predicament. He grabbed her and pulled her to his side. Instantly, all the terrifying colding aura was isolated. It was like there was a thick, invisible wall surrounding Qin Yu. The fear and panic in Mo Yuan's heart instantly vanished. Her pounding heart slowly calmed down. This man always appeared when she was in the most dangerous and helpless situation. Was this the arrangement of fate? Thinking of this, Mo Yuan's calmed heartbeat accelerated once again. Unfortunately, at this moment, Qin Yu didn't have time to appreciate her shy appearance. He said in a low voice, "We're in trouble." It wasn't a coincidence that he appeared here today. Before he left, he had used Mo Yuan's aura to locate the coordinates. After all, this abyss was strange and perilous. If she was careless, she could easily fall into danger. Mo Yuan hurried to gather her thoughts. What happened? The original god in the heaven eradicating abyss isn't dead. The blood moon above our heads was summoned by him. Qin Yu lifted his head to look at the blood moon. This time we've been tricked. With the information he obtained, although it wasn't complete, he could approximate the basic outline of the situation. In the Imperial City, the news about the source of the original god and the heaven-eradicating abyss was simply a bait. Unfortunately, it seemed that the person who had planned this had become a chess piece and had completely lost control of the situation. Blood Moon, the original god in the heaven-eradicating abyss, the woman called Yang Ri hidden in Hushan's body, the Silver Moon, sword intent, the Blood Moon, world of the past, and the slash marks that covered that world, intuition told Chinyu that he had fallen into a great deal of trouble. And what was most terrifying was that almost everyone involved was far stronger than he was. He couldn't even be considered a chess piece. He had inadvertently stumbled into someone else's plan. Originally, if this was it, he might have had a chance to escape. But Emperor Obum's eyes told Chinyu that even if he temporarily left the battlefield, he wouldn't be able to escape from this place. This plan had to be completely brought to an end before there was a chance to turn things around. From what Chinyu could see, there were only two possible results today. One was that the original god in the heaven-eradicating abyss had the last laugh. Under the illumination of the Blood Moon, all the cultivators here had died. Then they were resurrected and restarted their life. The second reason was that the woman named Yang Ri in Hushan's body had turned the tables in a dangerous situation. Even though she seemed to be at a disadvantage and was being suppressed in every aspect. But Chinyu always felt that someone who could summon the descent of the divine mark wouldn't be so easily defeated. Chinyu certainly hoped that it was the second possibility, but he knew that with his current cultivation, there was nothing he could do. If he rashly rushed forward, he would only be sending himself to death. The most important thing now was to think of a way to survive until the end. Only by living could he try to do something. He looked down into the abyss. Although he had escaped, he had a faint feeling that made him feel unhappy he would return again. He took a deep breath and suppressed his chaotic thoughts. He said, "Now, I need to find a place where you won't be invaded by the Blood Moon's strength for the time being." Mo Yuan immediately grasped the crux of his words. "Where are you going?" Chinyu hesitated for a moment. "I'm not sure whether or not the Blood Moon will shine beyond the barrier of the fragment world. So I need to take a look. Xiaoyu is still there." Mo Yuan looked at him. "In this situation, you and I could die at any moment. Do you really need to worry about so much?" Chinyu shook his head. "I rarely make promises to others, but since I made one and I haven't died yet, I naturally have to abide by it. All right, let's not waste any more time. I'll take you there now." Chinyu grabbed onto Mo Yuan's hand. His figure moved and he held upwards. A moment later, he stopped moving, raised his hand and blasted a punch forward. Dong! There was a deep and dull sound, like the beating of a great drum. Space shook and ripples spread outwards. A translucent membrane appeared. It didn't seem thick, but its toughness was astonishing. It withstood the strength of Mo Yuan's punch without any signs of breaking. But it was clear that Chinyu had already expected this. The moment this membrane appeared, he slashed out with his fingers like a sword. Hum! 5-colored light surged at his fingertips. It immediately shrank into a silver-white light that flashed away. A crack appeared in front of them. Then a swallowing strength was released from within. "Don't resist," Chinyu said. He pulled Mo Yuan and stepped forwards, taking the initiative to enter. In the next moment, this translucent membrane rapidly healed and everything turned dark. "This is..." Mo Yuan whispered. Chinyu said, "That's right, this is the channel that we use to enter the abyss." "But didn't you say that there were unknown dangers at the end of this channel? But now, this might be the only place that isn't affected by the Blood Moon." Chinyu grabbed onto her. "Mo Yuan, if you believe me, you must remember that no matter what happens, do not try to leave this place." "I believe you." In the darkness, the invisible binding strength became increasingly strong. It was like layers upon layers of silk wrapped around her body, tightly wrapping around her and constantly tightening. Mo Yuan felt as if she were drowning. She gradually found it hard to breathe. But she remembered Qin Yu's warning and didn't resist at all. Gradually, her mind drifted away, then drifted away again and again. She fell into a semi-conscious state after an unknown period of time. Just as Mo Yuan thought she would fall into an eternal slumber and never wake up again, all the bindings around her disappeared. Mo Yuan, wake up. Hurry and wake up. Who is calling me? Qin Yu, it's Qin Yu. I can't sleep. I have to wake up. After struggling for a long time, she finally opened her eyes and saw Qin Yu in front of her. Her pale face squeezed out a smile. Have we arrived? Qin Yu nodded. You've done well. We're safe for now. Mo Yuan swept her eyes around. When she saw what was around her, she froze. This? Where is this? What entered her eyes were numerous egg-like meat sacs. They varied in size and were translucent. Their insides were filled with some sort of red viscous liquid. At the ends of these sacs, there were countless blood vessels that slowly wriggled as if they were absorbing something. Looking up, one could see countless blood vessels connected to these meat sacs. It was unknown where they led to. And now, Mo Yuan and Qin Yu were in one of these meat sacs. Following her gaze, Qin Yu was silent for a moment. Then he slowly said, "These blood vessels lead to a giant sarcophagus." Mo Yuan's eyes widened. Sarcophagus? Qin Yu pointed at her and then at himself. You, me, and the people in these meat sacks are all nourishment. Chapter 970. Looking at these flesh sacks, Qin Yu was even more certain of his previous speculations. He feared that from the very start, everyone had fallen into the origin god's trap. It lured cultivators from all over here, seizing their flesh, blood, and souls as nourishment to reconstruct its own body and then return from death. If that was really the case, then this was truly a huge chess game that had begun many years ago. Now it was time to end it. The other party had painstakingly waited and prepared for countless years. Wanting to ruin their plans was naturally incomparably difficult. What caused Qin Yu to bitterly smile was that even though he could see through the origin god's chess game, he was powerless to do anything about it. For instance, he knew that these flesh sacks were the key to reviving the origin god, but he didn't dare to destroy them. Otherwise, if he were to draw attention to himself, a casual strike from him would be enough to obliterate his body and soul. Qin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed all his thoughts. He said, "You stay here and wait for me to return. If I don't return, whether you live or die will depend on your luck." Ma Yuan nodded. "I know, but how will you leave now?" Qin Yu said, "I have my own methods." At this time, there was a loud, thumping sound in Qin Yu's mind. His complexion changed. He grabbed Ma Yuan, and with a shout, the sun-moon force field erupted, wrapping around the two of them. In the next moment, a joyful thought appeared in the perception of all the cultivators within the flesh sacks. Then it turned into a desire to devour them. It was like a giant that had been slumbering for countless years was about to awaken. Now, it needed more strength to support itself. Ah! Pain screams echoed out from the countless flesh sacks. The viscous, red liquid within began to boil. One could clearly see that the cultivators soaking in it were rapidly rotting and melting, like candy under high temperatures. They crazily struggled, but their cultivations had been suppressed. Their bodies twitched in pain, but they couldn't change their current situation. Death was terrifying, but what was even more terrifying was being slowly melted into liquid while they were still conscious. Ma Yuan's complexion was deathly pale. Although she tried to maintain her calm, her shivering body exposed the fear in her heart. If it weren't for Qin Yu, she feared she would have ended up like these people in front of her, falling into such a miserable fate. But he still had to leave. Lei Xiaoyu was still outside. Qin Yu's complexion darkened and his heart filled with awkwardness. In all fairness, he was naturally closer to Lei Xiaoyu. But he couldn't just leave like this and watch helplessly as Mo Yuan was slowly corroded away. Take her with him? As this thought raced through Qin Yu's mind, he immediately suppressed it. In the abyss covered by the blood moon, there were countless dangers hidden within. He didn't even dare to say he had the strength to protect himself, much less her. What to do? As Qin Yu was secretly anxious, the space where the meat sack was suspended suddenly began to violently shake. It was like some giant creature had suddenly flipped over. Bang, bang. The densely packed meat sacks collided with each other, emitting deep thumping sounds. Qin Yu's eyes flashed, and he looked up. Not far away, a giant meat sack entered his line of sight. Inside, there were actually over a dozen cultivators. Moreover, Qin Yu had seen many of them before. It's that junior! A loud shout rang out. Even though it was separated by the flesh sack, it could still be heard clearly. Every single syllable was filled with resentment and coldness. The one who spoke at this time was the old farmer, Qiu Shan, who had lived for countless years. Shua! Within the flesh sack, 3 other eyes instantly fell on Qin Yu. These 3 people were old monsters that had lived for countless years and possessed tyrannical strength. Mo Yuan cried out, Li Hongye! Not too far away, in the giant flesh sack, besides Qiu Shan and the other 3, the other cultivators were all imprisoned in a strange 3-legged furnace. The furnace shined with red runes and released a halo of light that forced back the liquid within the flesh sack, forming an empty space. It was because of this that Qiu Shan and the other 3 weren't affected at all. Indeed, the more experienced the older they became, the more methods they had. In this situation, Qin Yu could only borrow the sun and moon force field to temporarily be safe. As for the people within the 3-legged furnace, looking at their expressions, they didn't seem willing. This definitely wasn't a pleasant experience. As Mo Yuan cried out, Qin Yu also saw Li Hongye sitting cross-legged in the furnace. Her shoulders were pierced through by chains, and she was locked in the furnace. Mottled bloodstains, some fresh red and some dark, fell on her sword robes. Contrasting with her pure white robes, it was even more striking. As Qin Yu observed the other side, Qiu Shan and the other 3 also looked at him. Their cold eyes gradually revealed a burning heat. Originally, they didn't care much about what the dead Zhuohan had said about the treasures on Qin Yu's body. After living for far too long and experiencing far too many things, their horizons had naturally widened. Not just any random thing could catch their eye. Furthermore, in terms of treasures, any one of them could easily take out a staggering amount of treasures. All of these treasures had been accumulated over a long period of time. Before, they had targeted Qin Yu in order to cut off their opponents ahead of time and prevent others from entering the abyss before them. But now, looking at the relaxed expressions of Qin Yu and Mo Yuan in the flesh sack, Qiu Shan and the other 3 were finally convinced that Qin Yu had a treasure on him, and a precious treasure at that. That brat Zhuohan, although he had fallen into depravity and become a man-eating robber of the great Tao, his words were still correct. Besides this, they couldn't find any other reason to explain the scene in front of them. Although they could rely on the life refining furnace to resist the decomposition and digestion of the flesh sack, during this process, what they lost was the vitality and cultivation of the people imprisoned in the life refining furnace. Once these people were squeezed dry, the life refining furnace would lose its effect and they would be in great trouble. But now, the chance to erase this hidden danger had arrived. As long as they could seize the treasures in Qin Yu's hands, they wouldn't have to worry about anything else. Qiu Shan and the other 3 glanced at each other, all of them able to sense each other's thoughts. Let's go. These old immortals, besides being ruthless and thick-skinned, were also decisive in killing others, far surpassing ordinary cultivators. Since they had decided to kill others and seize their treasures, there was no need to hesitate. Moreover, the reason they had fallen to their current situation was all because they had been tricked by this boy. Qiu Shan sat down cross-legged. He flipped his hand and took out a seed. His eyes revealed a trace of regret. He lifted a hand and pointed at it. Hum! A halo of green light flashed. This seed began to take root and germinate at a speed visible to the naked eye. It floated in midair on its own, rapidly growing and flourishing. Go! Qiu-shan shouted out loud. The vine drilled out of the empty space and entered the tumbling mucus. Its surface released a green light that actually resisted the corrosion. But as the vine drilled into the mucus, its speed became much slower. It took a long time for it to reach the inner wall of the flesh sac. The vine attached itself to the surface and began to grow tiny roots. Little by little, it drilled into the flesh sac, causing the flesh sac to bulge outwards. It was like a seed that wanted to break out from the ground. Unfortunately, perhaps because this flesh sac was too large, its walls were too thick. The vine tried for a long time without success. The green light it emitted gradually dimmed as time passed. Frowning, Qiu-shan turned to look at the life-refining furnace. He reached out a hand and grabbed a cultivator. The vine's floating roots instantly wrapped around this person. The seemingly soft roots tore through his flesh and wildly drilled into him. Ah! The miserable screams came to an abrupt end. The cultivator's mouth had been completely sealed by countless roots that had drilled into him. His eyes were wide open, and he could even see that small roots had already burrowed into his body. Gulp, gulp. With a swallowing sound, the cultivator's body was completely covered up. As for the vine that had obtained flesh and blood, it began to release a brilliant green light. Finally, it broke through the flesh sac's blockade. After leaving the flesh sac, the vine's growth speed increased. It was like a hand reaching out, grabbing at the flesh sac that Qinyu and Mo Yuan were in. Pa! The vine landed on the surface of the flesh sac, wildly wrapping around it, tightly wrapping around it. Qiu-shan laughed. I've caught you. Now come over. The vine contracted, dragging the two flesh sacs as it slowly approached. Bang! Finally, with a light sound, the two flesh sacs collided. Both sides were separated by only 2 layers of flesh sac walls. They could clearly see each other's expressions. Leave the rest to me, the person beside Qiu-shan slowly said. But what he did was even more unexpected. This person lifted his hand and twisted off the pinky finger of his left hand, casually tossing it outwards. As the finger fell into the mucus, it began to rot and dissolve. The cultivator seemed to already know this would happen, so he quietly waited. After several breaths of time, the severed finger on his left hand had regenerated. The finger that was tossed out had also completely dissolved. However, after it dissolved, the mass of blood that was produced wasn't immediately absorbed. Instead, it condensed into a mass that didn't scatter. At this time, as a hand seal was formed, this mass of blood began to swim, floating towards where the 2 flesh sacs met. In the next moment, it began to fuse into the flesh sac walls at a visible speed. And during this process, the 2 layers of flesh sac walls began to fuse together, growing together. Success! At most a moment later, the 2 flesh sacs will grow together. They won't be able to escape. Qiu-shan and the other 2 immediately revealed looks of joy. When they looked at Qinyu and Mo Yuan, their eyes were cold. Junior, you have caused us to fall into such a distressed state. Once you fall into my hands, I will let you know what despair is. If you know what's good for you, hand over the treasure on your own initiative. Perhaps we can give you a way out and spare your life. Even if the result is death, the process is different. The difference is like the difference between heaven and earth. Qinyu, believe me, this is something you absolutely do not want to experience. The 4 of them were old monsters that had lived for a long time. They were well aware of each other's strength. It could be said that the 4 of them stood at the peak of the divine realm, not to mention taking half a step forward. Just a slight increase could allow them to break through their bottleneck and step into a new realm. In addition, they had hidden cards. As long as they didn't use their original divinity, they had nothing to fear. Not to mention, the four of them were working together today. Even if Mo Yuan obtained the inheritance of light and Qin Yu displayed an extremely powerful strength, in their eyes, the moment the two flesh sacks fused together, the result was already decided. If it was before, Mo Yuan might have been worried. But Qin Yu had entered the depths of the abyss and was able to escape unscathed. In addition to his various performances, she was filled with confidence. Of course, the most important point was that Qin Yu had maintained his silence from beginning to end, coldly watching Qiu Shan and the others. Mo Yuan was very sure that Qin Yu, who had previously been confident that he could escape from this place, would not be helpless. Then there was only one explanation. He deliberately let these people attack, and then he would have a logical reason to attack. Sure enough, Qin Yu looked cold, but in his bones, he was a very sentimental person. Even though Li Hongye's previous actions had dissatisfied him, he still did not want to see her die like this. Glancing at Qin Yu, Mo Yuan muttered, "Qin Yu, if you continue on like this, you will only be burdened with more and more troubles." Soon after, she bitterly smiled. In reality, she herself was one of the troubles. Time passed quietly. In the life-refining cauldron, Li Hongye suddenly opened her eyes. The sound of a sword rang out, and a sword shadow flashed through the void, slashing at the place where the two flesh sacks were connected. Humph! With a sneer, the master of the life-refining cauldron raised his hand and clenched his fist. With a paw sound, the sword shadow directly shattered and dissipated. Little girl, at a time like this, you still have the energy to care about others. It seems that I have been too kind to you. The two chains that pierced through her shoulder suddenly tightened. The wounds were instantly torn open, and large amounts of blood gushed out. Most of the blood was directly absorbed by the two chains. The remaining small portion landed on the Blade Master clothes that she was wearing, and blood blossomed one after another. Qin Yu and Mo Yuan, if you have a way, immediately escape. You are definitely not a match for these four old monsters. The master of the life-refining cauldron flicked his finger, and the two chains immediately trembled, like the strings of a zither being plucked. Even with Li Hongye's sword heart and will, she could not withstand it, and she let out a painful groan. You can't escape, they can't escape either. Little girl, don't waste your time. He paused for a moment, a smile on his face. But it seems that you have some special feelings for this boy. Once I capture him, I will imprison you all together. At that time, I will have you watch each other die bit by bit. It should be quite interesting. Qin Yu suddenly said, "As I thought, when people grow old and don't die, they will inevitably become abnormal." He lifted a hand and pointed. "That's right, this is the person I'm talking about. Are you the master of this furnace?" "Yes, you can call me Taoist Life Refining." This old monster wasn't angry at all. Instead, his smile became even calmer. "Qin Yu, I am really curious. Just what sort of treasure do you have that you aren't afraid at all when facing the four of us?" Qin Yu said, "If I were afraid, would you let me go?" Taoist Life Refining shook his head. Qin Yu lightly said, "Fear is the same, not fear is the same. Since that's the case, why should I feel fear?" "Interesting. You are the most interesting young man I have seen in all these years. If we met somewhere else, perhaps we could become friends." Taoist Life Refining shook his head. "But what a pity, in today's situation, your time has come." After a few words, the two meat sacks had smoothly joined together. Qiu Shan grinned and lifted his hand. The vines that had pulled the two meat sacks together suddenly emitted a strange green light. Like a giant snake, it howled and shot towards the two people. Qin Yu's expression was calm. He didn't care about the howling attack. He looked at Taoist Life Refining and slowly said, "You are strong, but I can see more clearly than you." He lifted his hand and pointed forward. Hum! In the void, faint ripples appeared. A buzzing sound that the ears couldn't hear suddenly spread out. Chapter 971. My name is Blood Moon. Really, that is my name. Why do you think there are people with the same name as me? Well, the reason is actually very simple. It is because the cultivation method I cultivate is called Blood Moon. And all those who cultivate the Blood Moon cultivation method will change their name to Blood Moon. As for the specific reason, don't ask me, because I don't know either. Let's cut to the chase and get straight to the point. Because I have been asleep for too long, I can't remember exactly how long it has been, but it should have been a long time. At that time, in order to break through my cultivation bottleneck, I slaughtered a small world and used its blood essence to temper my body. Originally, this was only a trivial matter. To the living beings that stepped out of the world barrier and entered the great desolate, all living beings trapped within the world barrier, no matter what race they were nothing more than slaves. Unfortunately, this theory didn't circulate throughout the great desolate, so I provoked a great deal of trouble. Those two crazy women didn't have any grudges against me, but because of this they risked their lives to kill me. Their backgrounds were extremely powerful, and they didn't fear my Blood Moon bloodline at all. Since I couldn't scare them and I couldn't defeat them, I could only run away. That is a memory that still causes my heart to palpitate when I think about it. If I had been just a little bit away, I would have perished. But they weren't any better off. That woman Silver Moon was schemed against and died. Yang Ri's body was destroyed, and only her remnant soul managed to escape. I knew that Yang Ri would come looking for me for revenge. So, a long time ago, not long after I regained consciousness, I began to lay out a plan. Until today, Yang Ri really did come. Besides her, there were also many other little things that I deliberately lured over. Although the only enemy that could enter my eyes was Yang Ri, these little things also played an important role. They were all cultivators born in this world with great potential. By extracting their blood essence to refine their souls and completing the final step of reconstructing their fleshly bodies, they would be able to form a close connection with the essence of the God world. It would no longer be able to resist my fusion. At that time, I could absorb the world's strength and truly return from the world of death. The entire plan was flawless. Of course, it also needed me to ensure that everything would develop according to my will. Anyone that tried to ruin my plan must die. But now I can sense it. A few lowly and weak ants are actually using up the materials I used to repair my fleshly body. They truly deserve to die. That's all for now. I'm going to send them on their way. Qin Yu pointed a finger forward and did not do anything else. But in the eyes of Qiu Shan and the other three, a great fear was revealed. To be able to survive through the long years and survive until today, these four old monsters were not only powerful, but they were also extremely sensitive to danger. At this moment, in the world of their perception, it was as if a huge mountain had suddenly descended. Without any fancy tricks, it was just unreasonably pressing down on them. Even if the four old monsters had thousands of tricks and trump cards, they had no chance to use them. In the next moment, the mountain crashed down. Their ears buzzed, and their consciousness sank into darkness. Putong, 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 with four continuous sounds, Qiu Shan and the other three fell down. Their bodies were unharmed, but their consciousness was destroyed and their souls dissipated. There was dead silence. Even Mo Yuan subconsciously opened her mouth, her face full of shock, not to mention the cultivators imprisoned in the life-refining cauldron. They had fought with Qiu Shan and the other three before, so they were well aware of how strong they were. They were absolutely strong enough to easily roll over them. But now, what did they see? Qin Yu had only lifted a hand and gently pointed forward. Then there was nothing. For old monsters that had lived for a long time and their strength had reached the peak divine realm, with just a little bit more, they would have stepped into the original divinity realm. Yet they had died like this? To be able to kill them was already very terrifying, not to mention that they had died so quietly and cleanly. At this moment, as they looked at Qin Yu, their eyes were like looking up at a mountain that pierced through the clouds and couldn't be seen. This shock and awe was so strong that it even suppressed the joy of escaping. Everyone maintained a dazed expression. But in truth, these people didn't know that in their eyes, this inconceivably powerful Chinyu, there were also tumbling waves in his heart. Although he had guessed that the original divinity in the abyss was strong to the point of defying the heavens, his methods were still terrifying beyond his expectations. Chinyu even suspected that the reason he was able to escape from the abyss wasn't because his reaction was fast enough. Instead, it was because the other wanted to capture him alive. Otherwise, if the other just wanted to kill him, he didn't need to use any more tricks. He just needed to use that move to annihilate him on the spot. Moreover, what was more important was that Chinyu could faintly sense that this boundless consciousness came from the giant sarcophagus above his head. This immediately extinguished the thoughts that had been in his heart. If he really got close to it, he would be crushed into pieces before he could even get close to it. They were all original divinity realm. But why was the one in the heavenly eradicating abyss so strong? First Emperor of the Great Chu was an original divinity realm, and Emperor Obum was also an original divinity realm. However, they were just pawns in his hands. How terrifying it was! Li Hongya looked at Qin Yu bewilderedly. Thinking about her previous thoughts, she felt a little bitter. It turned out that she had underestimated him. Such a strong man wasn't someone she could casually guess. The reason why Qin Yu didn't care about the outside world was that he didn't put them in his eyes. That was right. With Qin Yu's strength, the world in his eyes was different from theirs. As for her, she had the reputation of being a sword maniac. Her talent was outstanding, and she also had a noble background. She was just a small part of him that he didn't put in his eyes. Qin Yu finally calmed his thoughts. His eyes swept over the other side, and he knew that these people were overthinking things. If he really had the strength to kill Qiu Shan and the others, he wouldn't need to live so carefully like he did now. However, Qin Yu didn't intend to explain this matter. In such a dangerous situation, in order to ensure that everything went according to his plans, it was better for them to maintain a certain amount of awe. Thinking this, Qin Yu straightened his back. He pulled Mo Yuan with one hand and stepped forward. Wherever they passed, the sun and moon force field moved. From an outsider's point of view, the space was filled with an invisible force that pushed away the terrifying mucus. But in the perception of these people, there was nothing in front of them. They couldn't feel any energy fluctuations. This naturally caused the awe in their hearts to become even stronger. Pa! Qin Yu brought Mo Yuan and stepped into the space of the life-refining cauldron. A trace of dark golden light flashed in the depths of his eyes. Because of the awe in their hearts, they didn't dare to look directly at him, so they naturally didn't notice it. As for Li Hongya, she was lost in thought and her mind was in a trance, so she also didn't notice it. In the next moment, everyone in the life-refining cauldron felt the binding strength around them vanish. Walala! With a grinding sound, the chains that pierced through Li Hongya's shoulder and locked her in place rapidly retracted. On the surface of the life-refining cauldron, the bright red runes began to slowly extinguish. They were free, they had survived, but at this moment no one thought of this. They only looked at Qin Yu, the awe in their hearts reaching the peak. With just a glance, he was able to make this formidable life-refining cauldron that could suppress them submit. Just what sort of boundary was this? This point far surpassed everyone's imagination. But there was one thing they were sure of, and that was that they absolutely could not be enemies with Qin Yu. Otherwise, with just a glance, they might die. Thank you, fellow Taoist Qin Yu, for helping us. Everyone left the life-refining cauldron and respectfully said. Li Hongya's complexion paled. It was only by relying on her formidable will that she didn't fall. She looked at Qin Yu, her heart in a difficult position. Although she knew she was in the wrong, she couldn't say any words of apology. Qin Yu didn't continue to make things difficult for her. Ma Yuan, Miss Li's injuries are heavy. Take care of her. As he spoke, his eyes swept over everyone. Just now a thought flashed through his mind. Although it was a bit whimsical in the current situation, they shouldn't miss out on any chance. Although everyone has escaped calamity, the true dangers of today have yet to arrive. If we cannot survive this, we will all be buried here, falling into the endless abyss for all eternity. Everyone's complexions changed. With Qin Yu's current status in their hearts, no one doubted his words. A person cupped his hands together. May I ask fellow Taoist Qin Yu, what dangers are we talking about? Qin Yu said, I don't have much time to explain. You can all see for yourselves. Turning around, he raised his hand and slashed in front of him. Like a sharp knife, he cut a small crack on an incomparably large piece of thick cowhide. It was very, very small, but it was enough for everyone to see through it and see what was happening outside. The first thing that entered their eyes was a resplendent sun. Right now, it was being crazily attacked by countless bone beasts. Every beam of sunlight was like the sharpest sword in the world, able to easily cut apart these giant beasts where they stood. But when they fell to the ground, their broken limbs and broken bones would rapidly reform. Underneath an invisible strength, they would reform once more, completing a process similar to rebirth. Although there was no sound, all the cultivators that saw this subconsciously felt awe and fear. This was because the strength displayed in this scene was far, far too strong. So strong that even if only a tiny bit of it spilled out, it was enough to destroy their bodies and souls. Qin Yu slowly said, This is a slaughter occurring in the abyss right now. If the side that has transformed into a sun can win, then we might be able to survive. Otherwise, as I said just now, everyone will die here. His voice suddenly stopped and his complexion became ugly. He stubbornly stared at the scene he could see through the crack. At this time, in this scene, there was a fragment of the earth slowly emerging from the darkness, descending to the bottom of the abyss. On this fragment, there were several massive mountains. When they were connected together, they formed an astonishingly large valley. Mo Yuan was the first to notice something strange. Qin Yu, what is it? After several breaths of silence, Qin Yu drew back his gaze from the scene. He took a deep breath and slowly said, Mo Yuan, I have a request. Perhaps it might be useless and might only cause you to die ahead of time. I agree. After a brief pause, Mo Yuan said, Without you, I would have died long ago. Qin Yu earnestly looked at her several times. Without saying anything more, he took out a stone. This stone was given to him by Hushan. It once contained an astonishing amount of blood vitality from a certain life form. After being crazily absorbed by Qin Yu several times, the blood vitality had dried up and returned to its original appearance. It was now gray and unremarkable. If it weren't for the illusion's sundering eyes, Qin Yu wouldn't have realized that this stone was a treasure. He used a finger to cut open his palm and clenched his fist, causing his blood vitality to erupt. A massive amount of blood was forced out and poured onto the stone. In the blink of an eye, it was absorbed. After absorbing the blood, the stone was restored to its original blood-red color. However, the color was very faint, as if it were only a thin layer. Qin Yu plucked out a strand of hair and handed it to Mo Yuan along with the stone. He said, If my hair suddenly combusts, gather all my fellow Taoists and pour all of your strength into this stone. After he finished speaking, he leaned over and whispered several more words. Sensing that Qin Yu was revealing an aura that could be called decisive, Mo Yuan didn't reveal her worries. She only nodded solemnly. Goodbye. After speaking, Qin Yu turned and walked away. Mo Yuan couldn't help but ask, Where are you going? Qin Yu paused. To the place I should go. His step fell, and he seemed to pass through a layer of fog, instantly vanishing from sight. In the next moment, cries of alarm rose up from the meat sack. This was because they could clearly see Qin Yu's figure in the scene outside the crack. He took a step up and a step down. From here, he had entered the battlefield. Mo Yuan glanced at the soundless image. After the descending fragment appeared, Qin Yu's attitude had changed. At this time, he didn't hesitate to take risks and return to the battlefield in the deepest depths of the dark abyss. Could it be that Lei Xiaoyu was hiding there? There was no time to consider this. Mo Yuan lifted the bloodstone in her hand. Because of Qin Yu's blood, the sun-moon force field hadn't collapsed yet. Everyone immediately throw the corpses of Qiu Shan and the others into the life-refining furnace. Everyone reacted. They hurried to throw the 4 corpses in. Mo Yuan tossed the bloodstone forward. The blood runes on the surface of the life-refining furnace lit up, releasing light once more and opening up a space. Her heart relaxed. She swept her eyes over everyone. Everyone has heard what Qin Yu said just now. I hope that everyone can do their best because right now, Qin Yu is risking his life for all of us. In truth, Qin Yu was indeed risking his life, but he wasn't as great as Mo Yuan said he was. For all of them? What a joke. If it weren't for Lei Xiaoyu, he would have been an idiot to return to that terrifying battlefield in the deepest depths of the dark abyss. That's right. Mo Yuan had guessed correctly. The fragment that was about to descend into the dark abyss was what Qin Yu had been searching for. The dwelling of that terrifying dragon beast. Lei Xiaoyu was hiding inside. Crazy! I must be crazy! Qin Yu muttered to himself. As he felt the terrifying aura surging in the air, he bitterly smiled. But life was like this. Not everyone could retreat at all times, even if avoiding danger was an instinctual survival instinct. Because sometimes you couldn't retreat. For instance, if Qin Yu didn't act now, Lei Xiaoyu would die without a doubt. So he had come. Chapter 972. Leng Yin gave up on tearing apart the bloodlight. Of course, before this, he had already tried all methods. Everything showed that it was just as Emperor Ophum said. With his current boundary, it was impossible for him to break through the bloodlight. He sat down cross-legged, sword intent lingering around his body to prevent himself from being harmed. He calmly watched the battle between the great sun and the bone giant beast. Suddenly, Leng Yan's eyebrows rose up, revealing a look of surprise. He looked at the figure that was cautiously approaching. It was actually this junior. He had just escaped a calamity, but instead of trying to find a way to leave, he had actually returned here. Did he want to be the fisherman that reaped the benefits? But even if he wanted to be the fisherman, he still needed to be strong enough. Otherwise, any random splash would cause him to die a miserable death. Bang! A turbulent flow of strength howled towards him. Qin Yu's complexion changed, and he hurriedly dodged. There was a loud explosion from the ground beside him. Even though he had dodged, Qin Yu's face still paled. Leng Yan's eyes revealed a trace of appreciation. Besides being too greedy, this junior's ability to sense and capture auras could be called amazing. With his cultivation, if he had reacted even an inch slower, he would have been struck by that turbulent flow just now. Even if he didn't die, he would have been severely wounded. Perhaps it was because he knew he was about to die, but after a moment of hesitation, he took the initiative to ask, "Junior, why did you come back?" Qin Yu gasped for breath. He looked at this sword path powerhouse through the bloodlight. "I wanted to save someone." This answer was unexpected. Lan Yen thought for a moment. "To save my teacher?" Qin Yu shook his head. "Of course not. Although I have some confidence in myself, I would never be arrogant to such a degree." He lifted a hand and pointed at the earth fragment that was about to descend. "The person I wanted to save is over there." Leng Yen frowned. "Just to save someone?" Qin Yu said, "Otherwise I would have run away long ago." "Aren't you afraid of death?" "I am." "Then why did you come back?" "I gave her a promise." Qin Yu took a deep breath and didn't say anything else. His feet fell, and he vanished like a wisp of smoke. Dodging the shock waves of strength that swept out from all directions, he constantly approached the descending earth fragment. Lang Yen had a strange expression. He looked at Qin Yu's receding back for a long time, and then a trace of regret appeared in his eyes. If he had chosen to keep his promise just now, the outcome wouldn't have been any worse, right? Unfortunately, only time could not be reversed in this world. A mistake was a mistake, and one had to bear the consequences. Roar, roar. Cruel roars echoed out from the shattered earth. Chinyu knew that the one roaring right now was that terrifying dragon beast. It seemed to be unwilling to descend to the bottom of the abyss, currently resisting the summoning power. If not for this, the great earth fragments would have descended a long time ago. However, it was precisely because of this that the confrontation between the two powers caused extremely frightening ripples to appear in this space. Contained within those ripples was an incomparably tyrannical power. Chinyu frowned. He didn't dare to bet on what would happen after the land fragment descended. Therefore, if he wanted to take Lei Xiaoyu away, he had to do it before it descended. In other words, he had to pass through these spatial fluctuations and withstand their crushing pressure. After determining that there was no other choice, Chinyu took a deep breath. A dark golden light surged in his eyes. He looked up at the space above him that was violently shaking like a raging sea. He had to find the best time to enter so that he wouldn't suffer too much damage. Moreover, he couldn't delay this for too long. Although the dragon beast was extremely powerful, and Chinyu guessed that it had broken through the limits of the divine realm, facing the summoning of the deep origin divinity, it might not be able to resist for too long. After several breaths of time, Chinyu's feet slammed into the ground. He shot into the skies like an arrow. Now was the time. Hum! His field of vision darkened, and his ears buzzed as if he had been punched. He had already rushed into the tide of spatial fluctuations. Without hesitation, he lifted a hand and punched out. Where his fist fell, it just happened to be the place where two spatial fluctuations collided. Because of this, the fist directly pierced through and revealed a channel. If it weren't for this, Chinyu wouldn't have been able to resist any one of the spatial fluctuations with his cultivation, let alone passing through the tide of spatial fluctuations. He feared that as soon as he entered, several layers of his skin would be peeled off and he would be torn to pieces in a miserable manner. Unfortunately, it was impossible for Chinyu to encounter such a situation at every step. When there was truly no way out, he could either drift with the current or choose the best direction and forcefully break through with his cultivation. In short, he had to endure the least amount of damage and pass through the most turbulent spatial flows. The strength of the ancient immortal body was fully displayed at this moment. Although Chinyu had been injured many times, as long as he had enough blood vitality in his body, he could instantly recover. Within the blood-red seal, Lang Yan had been paying attention to Chinyu's movements. He watched as he moved a little at a time and rushed into the tide of space. It was only at this moment that he truly believed everything Chinyu had said before. It turned out that this junior really did not care about his life in order to save others. He really didn't know whether to say that he was trustworthy or stupid. During this process, Lang Yan discovered that Chinyu's grasp of his aura had reached the peak. There were several times when he was just a hair's breadth away from the most fatal injuries. Perhaps at this moment, in the eyes of others, Chinyu appeared distressed, like a mouse struggling to survive. But in Lang Yan's eyes, he saw a stubborn will that didn't give up in the face of life and death, as well as a peerless self-control. Strength, eyesight, will, luck. If he lacked any one of these 4 points, it would have been impossible for him to live until now. There was one more thing that even Lang Yan was envious of. This junior's physical body was truly powerful. This person is a good seedling for sword cultivation. It's a pity that with the current situation, I'm afraid he'll only be able to do so. To be buried together with me in this endless abyss. Lang Yan said in a soft voice, regret in his eyes. If he had discovered Chinyu before coming to heaven eradicating abyss, he would have thought of a way to receive him as a disciple and make him his successor. Bang! Space fluctuated, forming a powerful pushing force. Chinyu curled up into a ball and protected his vital points. Like a rubber ball, it broke through the barrier of spatial fluctuations and landed on the ground with a thud. Therein, Chinyu straightened himself and wiped away the blood from the corners of his lips. Although the final distance seemed simple, He had withstood the pressure of 3 turbulent space flows. His entire body ached, and he feared that even his organs had received considerable damage. But right now, there was no time to heal his wounds. As he stimulated the ancient, immortal body to repair himself, he looked up to determine the direction he was heading in. Then he held away. Bang, bang. The ground constantly shook, accompanied by bursts of dragon roars. Qin, you could imagine the appearance of that terrifying dragon beast in a frenzied rage. At this time his body froze, as if he had been thrown into a world of ice and snow. His neck twisted a little at a time. He could clearly hear the muscles and muscles in his body tense up, emitting a crackling sound similar to a machine running out of oil. He didn't dare to move too quickly. Otherwise, Qin Yu feared that in the next moment he would be burnt to ashes by the destructive dragon breath. A pair of giant eyes filled with pain and brutality glared at Qin Yu. It was that dragon beast. In this situation, its sensing abilities were still so sharp that it instantly sensed his intrusion. Logically speaking, the dragon beast should be in an extremely berserk state right now. The crazed emotions in its bloodshot eyes were the best evidence. But it actually didn't attack as soon as it discovered Qin Yu. Qin Yu's thoughts raced. He said in a low voice, "Do you remember me? In the past, I hid a friend near your cave. Because I promised to protect her, I came back. My promise is relatively trustworthy. If you need anything, as long as I can do it, I will do my best." Roar. The dragon beast reared its head back and roared. The scales on its massive body began to fall off, revealing the rotting flesh and blood beneath. The air was immediately filled with a pungent smell. It was clear that it had reached its limit and wouldn't be able to last much longer. The dragon beast opened its great maw and spat out a sphere. This sphere was similar to an amber crystal that sealed the entire cave within. Currently, in this cave, Lei Xiaoyu was holding a miniature dragon beast in her arms. She had fallen into a deep sleep. As if sensing something, Lei Xiaoyu's eyelashes trembled and she slowly opened her eyes. As she saw Qin Yu in front of her, she was stunned for a moment before a smile bloomed on her face. She knew that Qin Yu would definitely return. "My child, take it away, live on." Intermittent thought fluctuations echoed out in Qin Yu's mind, deep and dignified, filled with endless exhaustion. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. "I guarantee that I will do my best." The dragon beast lowered its head to look at the sleeping little dragon. Suddenly, it opened its mouth and spat out a pure purple dragon breath. In an instant, it burned everything into nothingness and opened up a path in the turbulent space. Qin Yu roared out loud. His flesh and blood exploded and his body wildly swelled. In the blink of an eye, he surpassed 10,000 feet. Without any hesitation, he grabbed the sphere with both hands and turned around. With several loud rumbling sounds, he leapt into the passage through the turbulent space flows. In the next moment, there was an incomparably pained roar behind him. Qin Yu subconsciously reached out a hand and blocked the surface of the sphere. Then he turned his head and saw that the terrifying dragon beast's body was rotting away at a speed visible to the naked eye. All of its flesh and blood fell off, leaving behind nothing but a skeleton. Bang, bang. All of the colors on the ground faded away in an instant. Everything turned yellow and dark, completely devoid of life. The surface of the several mountains cracked open, and crimson light emitted from within. Endless magma gushed out, sweeping out in all directions, submerging and swallowing everything. Then, under the pull of an invisible strength, all of the magma rushed over and fell onto the dragon beast's skeleton. It rapidly condensed, covering it in a thick and fierce blood-red armor. Roar! The undead dragon beast reared its head back and roared. Black flames burned in its eyes, and sparks sprayed out from its nose and mouth. An aura that left one's heart racing erupted from its body. Qin Yu took a deep breath and turned around. His 10,000-foot body crashed into the abyss. The ground collapsed with a loud bang. Countless cracks, spread out from the pit. Qin bent his legs and leapt up, rapidly fleeing far away. Emperor Obum smiled. Little fellow, this entire heaven-eradicating abyss is my world. Where can you run to? Since you've returned, you might as well stay here. He lifted a hand and pointed. Catch him. I want him alive. The undead dragon beast covered in magma armor revealed a hint of struggle in its flaming eyes. It roared at Emperor Obum. Evil creature, do you want to defy my will? The undead dragon beast roared in pain. The struggle in its eyes quickly dissipated, leaving behind nothing but ruthlessness and destruction. Roar. It roared and rushed out, its speed unimaginable. It pierced through the air with a shrill sound, leaving behind a series of afterimages. It was like an incomparably thick bolt of blood-red lightning. Qin Yu's complexion was heavy. Saving someone was difficult, but leaving alive was even more difficult. He could feel the terrifying aura rapidly approaching from behind. After a brief calculation, he knew that if he brought this sphere with him, he would have no chance of escaping. If he couldn't escape, he could only face it head-on. Although he was weaker by more than a level in terms of absolute cultivation, he still had the strength to resist. For instance, the Silver Moon sword intent. Qin, you could already determine that the sword intent that Lang Yen displayed was the moon sword that he had comprehended in the world of the Blood Moon. The master of this sword intent must be related to the sword of the son of Yang. If he were to display this sword intent, she would definitely not stand idly by. As for using the Silver Moon sword intent and being locked onto by her will, Qin, you didn't care about this. No matter what he would face in the future, he had to survive first. Qin Yu stepped forward and stopped. He placed the spear on the ground, turned around and grasped forwards. Wrapped by the sun and moon force field, the sealed moon sword intent immediately descended into the abyss. In the next moment, the phantom of a silver moon slowly condensed above Qin Yu's head. Bright and brilliant moonlight sprinkled down like flowing water. Covered by the blood moon, it opened up a domain of its own, repelling all the blood red. Obum. The Emperor's complexion changed. Moon sword. Sure enough, under the reaction of its aura, the sun formed from the son of Yang suddenly rose in brightness. Yin and Yang combined, this junior had actually comprehended the essence of the moon sword. He wasn't like Lang Yen, who had grasped the sword intent, but whose boundary was far inferior. Dragon beast, kill him! Obum, the Emperor roared. Although he wanted to know just what aura was hidden within Qin Yu's body that he coveted, he couldn't care about that right now. Qin Yu had to die. The coexistence of the sun and moon could destroy the world. It could truly destroy the entire world. He had personally experienced this sort of terrifying might in the past. If it weren't for the strange blood moon cultivation method and his life-saving cards, he feared he really would have died here. Although Qin Yu wasn't the silver moon and the son of Yang was only burning its remnant soul to erupt with its final strength, he was still in an incomplete state and couldn't be compared to the past. He absolutely could not allow them to display this strike. As the son of Yang rose in brightness, Qin Yu could also feel a powerful aura that was completely different, but also came from the same source. Above his head, the shadow of the moon suddenly solidified. It galvanized the sword intent within his body, causing it to wildly rise. Without thinking, his body had already obeyed some sort of instinct and attacked. Qin Yu lifted a hand and slashed forwards. A radiant sword light held out, cutting down on the thick and fierce armor of the undead dragon beast. There was a loud explosion like a thunderclap. Countless fragments of armor rained down. The undead dragon beast angrily roared as it was sent flying away. At the same time, the radiant abyssal sun moved forwards. It flattened everything in its path, smashing apart all the bone beasts that tried to block it. But this sunlight that could easily crush bone beasts to pieces didn't cause any damage to Qin Yu at all. Rather, when it fell on his body, he felt warm and comfortable to the extreme. Even his internal injuries began to recover at a much faster rate. Ancient race. Yang Ri's figure emerged from the great sun. He swept his eyes over Chinyu. There was no longer the icy indifference from before. There was a bit of sadness and also a bit of gratification. Little sister, the inheritance you left behind in the past now has a successor. If you were in the netherworld and learned of this, you would also smile. Yu cupped his hands together and bowed. Greetings, Senior Yang Ri. His thoughts raced. The son of Yang Ri and Emperor Obum didn't seem to know that the ancient race had been destroyed. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been so calm when facing him. It seemed that their great war in the past had occurred countless years ago. At the very least, it had occurred before the ancient race suffered the great calamity. Yang Ri lightly said, "Since you have grasped the true meaning of the moon sword, you can call me Senior Apprentice, Aunt. But now is not the time to chat. Release the moon sword and help me cut down Blood Moon to take revenge for your master." Bang! The great sun formed by the sun sword wildly rose up. Their auras were drawn together, and you couldn't control them at all. The moon phantom above his head began to release its own light. The sun and moon rose into the sky, their light perfectly fusing together, completely expelling the aura of Blood Moon. The skeletons of the great beast that possessed nearly undying bodies began to howl in despair and collapse, their hard bones rapidly rotting away. Emperor Obum roared out loud. The undead dragon that had been sent flying away by the moon sword roared as it flew forwards, blocking in front of him like a mountain. As the light of the sun and moon wove together, a faint phantom appeared, casually slashing forwards. Roar! The undead dragon howled miserably. As if it could feel the arrival of danger, it opened its mouth and spat out a breath of magma that was filled with the smell of sulfur. However, the terrifying undead dragon beast's breath was split into two as if it had collided with an invisible sword. The howling came to an abrupt end. With a light cracking sound, a crack appeared on the surface of the undead dragon's head armor. Then it continued downwards until its massive body was completely cut in half. Behind him, Emperor Obum's two front limbs were crossed in front of him. He had clearly exhausted all his strength, but he still wasn't able to completely resist the onslaught of that terrifying aura. Pa! Pa! Cracks began to appear on the surface of his body, and blood wildly flowed out. If someone approached, they could clearly see a sword phantom in Emperor Obum's eyes, hanging in front of him. The tiny blood vessels in his eyes began to fill with blood. Then, with inaudible popping sounds, they rapidly turned red. Then, dark red blood began to flow down from the corners of his eyes. "Ah, block it for me." With a loud roar, the dignified crown on Emperor Obum's head and the imperial robes he wore began to burn together, turning to ashes. At the same time, a golden light shot out, gathering in front of him and turning into the phantom of a shield. Several breaths of time later, with a light cracking sound, the phantom of the shield shattered and dissipated. Emperor Obum's entire body shivered. Blood constantly flowed out from his wounds, dripping to the ground and shattering. At this time, the undead dragon in front of him had its massive body split apart and fallen to the ground. But what was strange was that it didn't make the slightest sound. The moment it touched the ground, the undead dragon turned to ashes and vanished from sight. Yang Ri, after 2 consecutive strikes, how much strength do you have left? You couldn't kill me in the past, so don't even think of doing so today. Emperor Obum roared out loud. Every syllable contained the strength of 10,000 caddies. It was cold, decisive, and powerful. Genius in a second. Remember this site's address. Mobile version. Chapter 973. Yang Ri's face was expressionless, and she didn't reveal the slightest bit of emotion. However, her eyes were much dimmer, and she couldn't hide the exhaustion in them. Glancing at Chinyu, Yang Ri lightly said, "He's right. My remnant soul has been burnt away, and I no longer have the strength to fight. Qin, you thought that even if someone guessed it, there was no need to admit it so easily, right? Even if you admit it, can't you lower your voice? Since he had said it so openly, he would definitely be heard. What else could he do next? Could it be that he had to stretch his neck and wait for death? Before Qin Yu could express his dissatisfaction about this matter, he was stunned by Yang Ri's next words. You were able to comprehend the true meaning of the moon sword through those slashes. In that case, there is no reason why you cannot comprehend the sun sword that I personally taught you. As Yang Ri spoke, he lifted a hand. Without waiting for Qin Yu to respond, he pointed a finger between his eyebrows. Bang! The great sun in the abyss erupted with blinding light. It was like a meteor streaking across the horizon, burning and releasing the last of its energy. Then, all of this light wildly collapsed and shrank, gathering into Yang Ri's body. Along with her finger, it brought with it an endlessly disdainful aura as it rumbled into Qin Yu's consciousness, turning into the phantom of a great sun. With a stuffy cough, blood flowed out from every orifice of his head. If it weren't for the fact that Qin Yu's mortal body was extremely powerful, he feared the sword intent would have invaded his body and torn him to pieces. As the aura of the sun's sword entered his body, the aura of the moon's sword within his body immediately became lively. Therefore, in the next moment, in the world of consciousness, beside the sun that had crashed into his body, a crescent moon appeared. It quickly filled up, and after a few breaths of time, it was as full as a jade plate, sprinkling down bright moonlight. Now, within the world of consciousness, the sun and moon hung high in the sky. Their auras were attracted to each other, and he couldn't control them. Their auras began to fuse together. Qin Yu's heartbeat nearly stopped. A cold sweat gushed out, soaking his back. He could clearly sense that while the auras of the sun and moon fused together, it seemed to be a smooth and natural process, but there was great danger lurking within it. The moon sword's aura was still manageable, and he could just barely control it. However, he couldn't sense the sun's sword at all. This was like a combination of two types of gunpowder. If the ratio was reasonable, the more powerful gunpowder would be obtained. However, if there was an accident during the process, there would immediately be a loud bang, and it would explode into a deluge of flowers. Thus, Qin Yu really was a bit panicked right now. He didn't doubt that once the aura of the sun and moon swords exploded in his spiritual world, no matter how many cards he had in his hands, he still wouldn't be able to avoid his consciousness shattering. From then on, he would become an idiot. Just thinking about this caused him to shudder. He didn't have time to blame Yang Ri for pushing him into such a dangerous situation. He closed his eyes and focused his mind into the world of consciousness, attempting to establish a connection with the Sword of Sun, a body blessed by the sun and moon. Yang Ri, aren't you thinking too highly of this junior? Emperor Obum slowly said. Yang Ri's expression was indifferent. If you haven't tried, how would you know it won't work? The reason is simple. It is because I will not give him the slightest chance. Obum, roared the emperor. The blood moon that covered heaven, eradicating abyss, suddenly exploded with light. The light condensed into a straight pillar of light that smashed down. Yang Ri lifted a hand and touched the point between her eyebrows. The dim sun phantom was covered in light once more, boundless and boundless, protecting Qin Yu within. This was the last of her strength. As her remnant soul wildly burned, it represented that an original divinity existence was about to thoroughly vanish. Faintly, the rules of the world resonated with it. The light of the great sun rose up by 30%, as if it wanted to leave its final mark in this world. It was like a true great sun. The beam of light that fell from the blood moon directly disintegrated. There was simply no way to interrupt Qin Yu's meditation. The emperor frowned slightly. Soon after, he let out a cold laugh. Just how exquisite were the sun-moon swords. Being able to comprehend one of them was already extremely rare, let alone cultivating both. Even back then, he had never heard of anyone who had done this. In today's situation, Yang Ri had been forced into a hopeless situation. Without any other choice, he could only choose to give it his all. The chances of success were nearly negligible soon. This junior Qin Yu's body would explode from the sun and moon sword intent, and he would die an incomparably miserable death. Of course, the most important thing was that he could see that the sun was burning. His remnant soul had obtained the support of the world's rules. Unless he went all out, he wouldn't be able to break through this defense. The situation was good. As long as he could endure for a moment and wait for the sun to completely dissipate, he would become the final winner. Emperor Obum naturally wouldn't accompany her in her madness. But at this time his heart suddenly shrank. It was like a giant, invisible hand had grasped it, the 5 fingers tightening around it. His heart palpitated like a tide, invading his mind. Emperor Obum fiercely looked up. The phantom of a blood moon appeared in his eyes, piercing through the light of the great sun to clearly see Qin Yu's current state. Above his head, there was a sun and a moon phantom. Although they were incomparably weak and the intensity of their auras was nearly negligible to him, this still represented an incomparably terrifying reality. Qin Yu had comprehended the sun sword, although he had only just crossed the threshold. The entire process had only taken a dozen breaths of time. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he would have never believed it. But the fear that came from the depths of his heart convinced him that all of this was true. Emperor Obum's first thought was, how did Qin Yu do this? But in the blink of an eye, this thought was tossed aside. His eyes coldly wrinkled. All that was left over was a cruel, killing intent. Die. This junior had to die. In such a short period of time, he had been able to perceive the sun sword. If he could smoothly control it, he would be able to use that destructive sword strike again, without the powerful undead dragon beast to block it for him. If he were to forcefully withstand the might of that sword strike, he really would die. When there was a choice, no one would be willing to risk their lives. But if the situation forced them, they wouldn't hesitate to do so. Moreover, this was the blood moon that had survived the great calamity and struggled to live to this day. In terms of ruthlessness and sharpness, he could be ranked first in the world. Bang! High in the skies, the blood moon that illuminated the entire sky, eradicating abyss, began to burn without warning. Flames tumbled about, and a terrifying aura was released. At this moment, it was like hell had arrived. Emperor Obum's face twisted as if he were withstanding some great pain. The blood moonlight that covered the abyss began to turn viscous. That's right, it was viscous. It seemed as if it could be touched. Netherworld blood sea. With a deep roar, Emperor Obum's body began to rapidly age at a speed visible to the naked eye. As a result, the blood moon's light that had turned viscous began to condense into something tangible. Like this, a vast sea of blood suddenly appeared in the abyss. One couldn't see where it ended. Rumble, rumble. One could clearly hear the roaring waves of the blood sea. Faintly, one could feel the pitiful and unwilling howls of countless lives. It was as if this blood sea was the result of the blood flowing out of their bodies, slowly accumulating into the boundless scale it was today. It was just that it was hard to imagine just how many lives had to die in order for their blood to gather into a blood sea. Waves of blood soared into the skies. They were like giant bloody mouths that opened wide in the blood sea, wanting to swallow the great sun into their stomachs. But the resplendent great sun was like an indestructible divine mountain that stood in the blood sea. No matter how the blood waves crazily crashed against it, it didn't change in the least. But it was clear that Emperor Obum, or rather, if one tossed aside his outer appearance and directly called him Blood Moon, no matter what title or status he had, no matter how great the price he had to pay, it wouldn't be so simple. Thus, the boundless sea of blood reflected the sky, causing a burning blood moon to appear in the middle of the sea of blood. The flames spread with a bang, covering the entire sea of blood in the blink of an eye at a shocking speed. Every drop of seawater burned fiercely. All of its destructive strength rumbled, towards that resplendent great sun. The burning of remnant souls ultimately had a limit. No matter how dazzling the light was, there would come a time when it would dissipate. Yang Ri was well aware of this. So when the cracking sounds echoed in her ears, her expression didn't change at all. She had already done everything she could. As for whether or not she would succeed, she could only rely on the will of the heavens. However, Yang Ri believed that the will of the heavens stood on her side today. Otherwise, why would Qin Yu be sent to her? Although he had comprehended the sword of the moon and the connection of their energies had a supportive effect, for him to be able to recognize the sword of the sun in such a short period of time was proof of his unbelievable talent in swordsmanship. Qin Yu's complexion was pale and beads of sweat covered his forehead. His black robes were already soaked through. Above his head, the sun and moon phantoms slowly became more and more real as time passed. All of this proved that his perception of the sword of the sun was progressing smoothly, and everything was progressing in a good direction. But Qin Yu didn't dare to be careless, thus he was a bit careless. Just as he said before, when the sun and moon sword intense fused together, there couldn't be the slightest mistake in the process. Otherwise, all of the smoothness and perfection before this would have been meaningless. As long as there was a loud explosion, he would become an idiot who drooled all day long. Faster! Hurry up! Qin Yu was well aware that he didn't have much time left. Emperor Obum absolutely wouldn't give him enough time to perceive a strength that could kill him. And Yang Ri's strength was nearly exhausted. Even if she didn't hesitate to pay any price, just how long could she last? Although he was dissatisfied with Yang Ri placing herself in such a dangerous situation, the truth was that Qin Yu was well aware that this was the only chance of survival he could see. If he wanted to live on, he absolutely couldn't miss this opportunity, and there was still a thought that existed in Qin Yu's heart. Perhaps this was a turning point. He could take advantage of this chance to cleanly eradicate all the hidden threats in his body. But the premise of all of this was that he could smoothly perceive the essence of the sword of the sun. Otherwise, all of this was meaningless. Kacha! Kacha! There were more and more cracking sounds. The dazzling great sun that one couldn't look at directly was in fact covered with cracks, as if it would shatter at any moment. But it persisted, lasting for breath after breath. And with every breath that passed, the phantoms of the sun and moon above Qin Yu's head became increasingly solid. The restlessness that Blood Moon felt became increasingly thick. He suddenly reached behind him and pulled out his own eyeball. Disregarding the dripping blood, he began to chant in a low voice, as if he were praying. His hoarse voice revealed endless awe and piety. After several breaths of time, Blood Moon spread open his fingers. The bloody eyeball in his palm suddenly turned transparent and then vanished from sight. It was like some incomparably formidable existence had heard his prayer and had chosen to accept the sacrifice and descend upon him with its own strength. Rumble, rumble. The flames in the burning sea of blood suddenly rose up. The cracks within the great sun nearly doubled in number. Yang Ri stuffily coughed. Blood gushed out from the mouth and nose of the Hushan she had borrowed. At the same time, faint traces of aura drilled out. 7 auras rose into the air, condensing above her head and transforming into the figure of a woman. What was shocking was that her body was covered with cracks, as if she had been pieced together in pieces. At this time, a blood-red flame was calmly burning on her chest. It was like a piece of white paper had been lit on fire. After it was charred black, it turned to ashes. She was constantly dissipating. Chapter 974. Yang Ri looked down at the blood flames burning in his chest. There wasn't a hint of panic on his face. Rather, he revealed a faint smile. It was light and light, like a gentle spring breeze blowing across a frozen lake. It caused tiny ripples to appear on the surface of the water. If one wasn't paying attention, it would be difficult to detect. He had succeeded. Blood Moon also felt the sudden appearance of this terrifying aura that made his chest feel heavy and nearly made him spit out a mouthful of blood. Although this aura hadn't been released yet, it already caused a great sense of instinctive fear to rise in his heart. Sun and moon returning to one, he had actually done it. Blood Moon felt as if the heavens were playing a great joke on him. In the past, countless geniuses of heaven had shined like stars in the skies, but none of them had ever managed to accomplish this. Today, it had actually appeared in front of him in such a laughable manner. And the entire process had taken less than an hour. Was there really such a genius in this world? Above Qin Yu's head, the sun and moon phantoms trembled. Then they completely condensed, their auras perfectly compatible with each other. He slowly opened his eyes. As he saw the woman floating above Hushan's head, he paused for a moment and said, "Next time, if you want to do something so dangerous, can you tell me ahead of time?" Yang Ri lightly said, "There won't be a next time." Her calm voice revealed an aura that left Qin Yu secretly admiring. If he were in her shoes, he feared he wouldn't be as calm as her. "Qin Yu, I will soon dissipate. Before that happens, you must cut down Blood Moon and end this grudge." Unexpectedly, Qin Yu remained silent. Yang Ri looked at him. He suddenly frowned, as if he had thought of something. "Ha ha ha ha." Blood Moon reared back his head and laughed. His remaining eyes surged with endless emotion. A moment ago, he thought that the heavens were playing a great joke on him. But the truth proved that this was indeed a joke. It wasn't bad that Qin Yu had comprehended the sun sword, and it wasn't bad that he had reached the degree of fusing the sun and moon together. But his cultivation was far too low. He was a junior that hadn't even reached the divine realm. Even if he had some cards in his hand that allowed him to erupt with strength, the difference was far too great. He couldn't slash out that sword. Qin Yu bitterly smiled. He thought that this was truly a sorrowful story. He had used all his strength, and with the help of the jade egg, he had finally comprehended the sun sword. But in the end, this was the result. No one would be able to accept this. However, things like cultivation, no matter how talented one was, required time to accumulate bit by bit. According to the current gap, he might only be able to successfully slash out this sword after several decades or centuries. But it was obvious that he wouldn't make it in time. Yang Ri slowly said, "Your cultivation isn't high enough, but you can borrow it." The speed at which her figure turned into ashes suddenly increased. Lung Yen, who was wrapped in bloody light, stood up straight. Bang! A scorching ray of light shot down, shattering the bloody light. "Yang Ri, do you think I can't think of what you can think of? You want to borrow his power? Dream on." The Blood Moon sneered. Suddenly, huge waves surged out of the burning sea of blood, covering the sky and earth. However, right at that moment, a figure whistled through the air and collided with the overwhelming wave of blood. "Although your realm is higher than mine, I'm still an original God Realm warrior. It's a little embarrassing to be ignored for a long time." With a light cough, Murong Chyoga constantly wept blood. His entire body was wrapped in crimson flames that felt extremely similar to the flames of the Blood Sea. Because of this, he was able to avoid withstanding the terrifying, crushing pressure of the burning sea of blood. Shui Yuan roared, "You are seeking death." Murong Chyoga laughed. "For countless years, I have wandered between life and death, but I have never been able to find the right path. If you can send me to my death, then bring it on." Bang! The burning sea of blood roared. Giant waves held forwards. Murong Chyoga turned to look at Lung Yen. "Do what you must. I hope you won't make the wrong choice this time." Lung Yen cupped his hands together. He turned and stepped forwards. His sword hummed and fell to his knees in front of Yang Ri. "Teacher, please forgive me." Yang Ri said, "You can make up for everything." "Yes, teacher." Lan Yen stood up and looked at Qin Yu. "If you can survive today, go to Myriad Sword Mountain for me and take several heads." Qin Yu thought to himself. He revealed a solemn expression. "Kill who?" Lan Yen lightly said, "You will know when the time comes." He didn't speak further. He lifted his arms, and the boundless sword intent he had cultivated for his entire life was released without reservation. I have cultivated the sword my entire life. I am confident that the 3-feet-long blade in my hand can cut down all in the world. You must remember this point and then lend me your sword intent. Bang! His entire body began to burn within this torrential sword intent. In the white flames, his figure rapidly turned transparent. Finally, he vanished from sight. In the next moment, this endless sword intent held forwards, turning into a raging current that poured into Qin Yu's body. It was like he had swallowed an entire mountain. Qin Yu's face flushed red, and every inch of his flesh and blood shivered in pain. Blood constantly seeped out from his millions of pores. It was like he would explode from this strength in the next moment. He impatiently wanted to vent this strength. Ah! Qin Yu roared out loud. He lifted a hand and grasped forwards. The sun and moon above his head simultaneously lit up, releasing a brilliant light. Rumble, rumble, within the entire sky eradicating abyss, the winds and clouds changed color. An invisible aura descended, and the rules trembled. The black vault of heaven seemed unable to withstand it and began to disintegrate in large swathes. The burning blood moon was sucked in, becoming dark and gloomy. Within the blood sea, most of the raging flames were extinguished. The blood moon roared out loud. It lifted a hand and dug out another eyeball. Without hesitation, it offered it to the great ruler it believed in, praying for more strength to descend upon it. Bang! The flames of the blood moon rose, and the endless blood sea began to boil. All of this indicated that there would soon be a heaven-shaking collision. But just before he attacked, Qin Yu forcefully suppressed the terrifying sword intent that threatened to tear him apart. He clenched his teeth and roared, now. The hair that Qin Yu had left behind in Mo Yuan's hand suddenly began to burn. She shouted out loud, "Fellow Taoists, attack with me!" Without hesitation, everyone mobilized all of their strength to attack the bloodstone that had been tossed out. Dozens of formidable strengths were instantly absorbed. In the next moment, the bloodstone trembled and shattered, opening up space. Bang! Qin Yu's figure appeared. Before anyone could speak, a wild aura rushed towards him and pressed him to the ground. He looked up, his eyes piercing through everything. He looked up at the area above his head where the blood vessels connected to the flesh sac gathered. With a step, the flesh sac shattered. Qin Yu shot into the skies like a bolt of thunder. Wherever he went, all obstacles were twisted apart by the raging strength around him. The original god that was slumbering in the sky, eradicating abyss, was called Blood Moon. He was an incomparably powerful and cunning existence. Emperor Obum's body wasn't his life gate. Even if he were to be cut down, the most he would do was fall into a deep slumber once more. After the endless years passed, he could still awaken once more. Above his head, the burning blood moon could be considered his life gate. But in front of this life gate, there was the word false. If Qin Yu had used the method he used in the blood moon world and cut down this burning blood moon, he would have died, but he would still have a chance to revive. Blood Moon's true life gate had been hidden from start to finish. It was hidden deep within the abyss, within a sarcophagus. Inside was his nearly complete body. He had even cultivated a semi-independent consciousness that was split off from his main body. This hidden space was the place that Blood Moon had spent the most time and effort over the countless years, and it was only completed with the help of a supreme treasure. It was because of this that even someone as formidable as Yang Ri hadn't been able to sense it from start to finish. But Qin Yu knew of its existence. He had found his true life gate. Bang! A thick and solid membrane froze for a brief moment before shattering. Qin Yu held out. Countless fragments that couldn't be seen with the naked eye tumbled down in all directions. That sarcophagus had appeared in front of Qin Yu. This was the moment. He lifted his hand and fused all of the sword intent that Lang Yen had sacrificed himself into his sword. Lun Yen had given up his life to fuse all of his sword intent into Qin Yu's body, helping him display the swords of sun and moon to cut down the god Blood Moon. But just as he was about to attack, he vanished from sight. Yang Ri, Blood Moon, as well as the blood-sobbing and paper-white Murong Chioga, all of them subconsciously froze. Although they thought this was inconceivable, their first thought was that this boy wouldn't take advantage of this chance to escape. But soon after, Blood Moon's reaction overturned this guess. He froze, his face filled with anger and a bit of unconcealable fear. That's right, it was fear. This was the first time he had revealed such an expression. Even before this, when he discovered that Qin Yu had smoothly comprehended the Sword of Sun, he hadn't had such an expression. No. Blood Moon crazily roared. He looked down at the earth beneath his feet. In the next moment, the ground shattered and endless, boundless sword intent surged out. It was like a flood that broke through a dam, tearing apart everything in its path. The giant sarcophagus was particularly conspicuous amongst the shattered earth. Now it was cut in half and pained roars echoed out from within. A pair of hands grasped the edge of the sarcophagus and propped up his body. But this was all he could do before he froze in place. In the next moment, a gust of wind blew past, and the sarcophagus was turned to ashes. At the same time, the enraged Emperor Obum's second body that Blood Moon controlled had its aura severed. The destruction of the main body was the same as severing its roots. Naturally, its life force was extinguished. Rumble, rumble, the world roared and shook. The burning Blood Moon in the skies rapidly dimmed, as if it would soon be extinguished. The sea of blood on the ground vanished without a trace. Blood Moon had died. Because of his existence, the heaven-eradicating abyss would also collapse with him. Yang Ri's eyes lit up with understanding. He felt a lingering fear as well as a bit of gratitude. If it weren't for Qin Yu finding the true hiding place of Blood Moon's main body, then even killing him would have been futile. But now he had been killed by his master's aura. He had thoroughly perished without any chance of resurrection. Now his enmity had been avenged. His family and his little sister from the past could finally rest in peace. Yang Ri closed his eyes. The phantom turned to ashes, and the last wisp of his remnant soul was thoroughly burned away. In this grudge, both sides had perished. No matter who was right or wrong, it couldn't be considered a satisfactory result. But this was how the world was. Not everything followed the will of a person. There were always some things that had to be done, even if one knew that they would eventually pay the price with their life. Qin Yu gasped for breath. Blood flowed out from all his pores, and his black robes had been torn apart by the sword intent. It made him look extremely distressed. But after the flesh sack was destroyed, those lucky cultivators that had survived looked up. There was no contempt in their eyes, only deep shock and awe. A sword strike had cut through the sarcophagus and determined the result. Just what sort of cultivation was this? Moreover, these people all owed Qin Yu a life-saving grace. With the heaven-eradicating abyss dissipating, everyone was naturally safe. But before the joy of surviving a calamity could spread through their hearts, their complexions changed. They saw that in the skies, the Blood Moon that was about to be extinguished suddenly erupted with an unimaginable light. It was incomparably dazzling, even more dazzling than the great sun. A light chuckle sounded out in everyone's ears. "Little fellow, I've found you." This voice wasn't unpleasant to listen to. Although it was a man's, it still gave off a pleasant feeling. But for some unknown reason, all the surviving cultivators in the heaven-eradicating abyss felt an endless chill in their hearts the moment they heard this voice. Fear surged like a tide. It was 100 times, 1,000 times more horrifying than being locked onto by their most terrifying natural enemy. It was as if all they needed was a single breath of time to perish in body and soul. No, it was as if their souls would forever fall into the endless sea of suffering, withstanding thousands of tribulations, never to rise again. This sort of despair sucked away all of their strength. They could only freeze where they were, maintaining an expression of fear on their faces, unable to even think. But Qin Yu was an exception. When the blood moon suddenly lit up, the sun-moon force field violently fluctuated, as if it were withstanding an extremely powerful invisible impact. But now, although this impact was powerful, it wasn't able to destroy the protection that the sun-moon force field gave Qin Yu. So, he only felt his heart palpitate for a second before he broke free. Without any hesitation, Qin Yu looked up at the blood moon that shined brighter than a great sun. He squatted down and grabbed a piece of the broken flesh sack. It looked extremely disgusting, and its surface was covered in a translucent mucus. The mucus dispersed the protection of the sun-moon force field and directly touched his flesh and blood. After the cool sensation, there was a faint numbing feeling. Starting from his fingertips, this numbing feeling instantly invaded his mind, causing his vision to blur. Before this, Qin Yu had already discovered that the mucus in the flesh sac contained a formidable curse strength. This was the reason why cultivators that were immersed in it lost all ability to resist. Now, what was affecting his body was the power of this curse. His heart fiercely shrank. Another wave of fear rose up from the depths of his soul. At this moment, Qin Yu heard a deep and angry roar that came from a distant space. "Flesh and blood creature that killed my descendant, I will throw you into the sea of curses and suppress you there for all eternity. You will be tortured for 10,000 years. A trace of purple appeared between Qin Yu's eyebrows. Then it turned into a closed purple eye. It was incomparably demonic. As the purple eye appeared, the rules within heaven eradicating abyss began to seethe. This was because another formidable existence was about to cross through space and descend. Everyone was already so frightened by the aura of the blood moon that their minds nearly collapsed. The despair in their eyes deepened. If they could still think, they would shiver and ask Qin Yu, "Big brother, just what atrocious crime did you commit that you could draw in two inconceivably tyrannical existences?" Quietly beside the burning blood moon, a giant purple eye slowly appeared. Two boundless consciousnesses met as they crossed through space. Blood moon. Eye of curses. There were coincidences in this world, but for the consciousnesses of two peerless powerhouses to arrive at the same place, there had to be a reason. Without needing to communicate, both sides understood that their goal in arriving was the same. This flesh and blood creature killed my direct descendant. I must obtain it. I am also interested in this junior. After a brief silence, both consciousnesses drew back a bit, as if they had reached some sort of tacit understanding. Since their strengths were equal and neither side was willing to withdraw, then they would rely on their own methods. Whoever captured this person first would be the one to obtain it. Within the burning blood moon, a figure appeared. This figure was tall and straight. He wore a large cloak, mysterious and terrifying. At almost the same time, the purple eye beside him trembled for a moment before slowly opening. Bang, bang. Qin Yu sensed something. A heaven-shaking roar rang out in his ears. It was like two towering divine mountains were crashing down on him, causing his chest to feel heavy and his heartbeat to nearly stop. The sun and moon force field violently shook, distorting and distorting. It made one worry that it would shatter and collapse in the next moment. Within his soul space, the purple moon and blue sun shined brightly. Although their revolutions were a bit slower, they weren't cut short because of this. Thus, after a brief buzzing in his ears and his vision darkened, Qin Yu's consciousness condensed, and he used it without hesitation. Perhaps this could be called one of his most formidable cards. Although he didn't know how much flow of energy this card could erupt with, it definitely wouldn't disappoint. Chapter 975. In a distant, different world, in the sea region where the Beast Trainer Alliance was located, President Douglas was calculating the losses of the Alliance in the next 10-year cycle. He was trying to reduce some of the unnecessary losses. After sitting here for several hours, he had barely managed to reduce some of the expenses. But, looking at the still massive base number, President Douglas couldn't help but bitterly smile. He sat up straight and rubbed his temples. Originally, with the Alliance's background and wealth, there was no need to do this. But in the past, that old white ape had taken advantage of the situation to extort them, emptying out 70% of their treasury and causing the entire alliance to suffer a great deal of damage. Every time President Douglas thought of this, he felt a deep sense of guilt towards his ancestors. His heart ached so much that he found it hard to breathe. President Douglas picked up a teacup and took a sip. He thought that even the quality of his tea leaves had fallen by more than a level. But before he could swallow the hot tea, his eyes widened. He looked even more dazed than if he had seen a ghost. Puff! He spat out a mouthful of tea, soaking the table. But he didn't care about that right now. He took a step forwards and vanished. In the next moment, he appeared in the skies above the island. And at this time, the powerhouses in the Alliance headquarters all felt the sudden eruption of a terrifying aura. The skies were filled with figures. They saw President Douglas, but the shock brought about by the scene in front of them caused their jaws to drop open, and they even forgot to bow to him. They saw that in the distant sea region, the phantom of a heaven-piercing jade wall appeared like a mirage. It was massive and contained an endlessly majestic aura. Even though it was only a phantom, it caused everyone who saw it to feel endless awe, as if they were facing the 3,000 Daos, facing the heavens and earth. But at this time, massive cracks appeared on this miraculous jade wall that connected the heavens and earth. The cracks wove together like a giant spider web. Then the jade wall collapsed. Pieces of fragments fell from the 9 heavens. Even though it was just a soundless illusion, it wasn't hard to imagine the earth-shattering momentum that was formed when the fragments fell with a loud rumble. Cries of alarm rose and fell. The Alliance cultivators looked at this scene in a daze. Their hearts were filled with endless shock, but they also couldn't suppress their excitement. Even if he didn't know the reason for what happened today, he would have something to talk about when he interacted with others in the future. For example, when a certain someone was at the headquarters, the weather suddenly changed, followed by a violent storm. A jade wall appeared between heaven and earth, and only a few deafening roars could be heard. The jade wall crashed into the sea and shattered into countless pieces, setting off endless waves. What? You're asking why what you said and what you saw are different? Haha, do you know what is embellishment? Do you know what is art? Being straightforward was a waste of conversation material. Only in this way could it have a better effect. However, the excited Alliance cultivators occasionally glanced at President Douglas and the Alliance elders, who were standing in the air. They discovered that the big shots looked as if they were going to eat someone alive. This jade disc doesn't seem simple. Could it be related to our alliance? White Ape sneered. What nonsense! Of course it isn't simple. It has a great origin. So great that a blockhead like you can't even imagine it. As he spoke, he lifted a hand and ruthlessly knocked it down. You little bastard. All you think about is some random nonsense all day long. Hurry up and cultivate. The future of my bloodline rests on your shoulders. If you dare to waste this good fortune, then I will skin you alive. The chicken overlord grabbed its head and stamped its feet. Old man White Ape, you are a monkey and I am a chicken. We aren't even family, so don't try to pull any relations with me. And that good fortune you spoke of, how come I don't know anything about it? If you dare to knock my handsome head again, then I will fight you to the death. White Ape crossed his arms and sneered. You've got guts. It looks like your skin has been itching for the past few days. Let me help you loosen up your muscles and bones. Of course, during the entire process, the chicken overlord was held down by White Ape's hammer and beaten until it cried out for its parents. After leaving behind a sentence, the chicken overlord fled in distress. The river flows east for 30 years. The river flows west for 30 years. Don't bully the young for being poor. White Ape chuckled. I'll be waiting for you to take revenge. Don't bully the young for being poor. So what if I bully you? When the chicken overlord disappeared from sight, White Ape's complexion darkened. He stared at the fading sky, piercing jade wall, worry in his eyes. As he thought, the Chenyu who had suddenly disappeared in the past hadn't perished. He had only left this world, to the native life forms. Wanting to open the world barrier and step into a different world was naturally difficult. But to White Ape, this was Chenyu who had fused with the jade wall embryo egg. To him, this was nothing out of the ordinary. But today, the sky-piercing jade wall had shattered. He had been forced to borrow its final remaining strength. Thinking about it, Chenyu must have encountered an extremely terrifying crisis. Could it be that the matter of him fusing with the jade wall embryo egg had been discovered by someone? If so, then the entire great desolate world would seethe with excitement. White Ape sucked in a deep breath, his eyes becoming increasingly dignified. He had finally found a junior with great difficulty. Although this junior had an unreliable temperament, his talent was top class. And more importantly, he possessed a heaven-defying good fortune that even he didn't know about. If Chenyu didn't die along the way, his future achievements would be like the sun and moon of the great desolate, illuminating the endless world. With him by his side, he would surely be able to accomplish great things in the future. He might even be able to help his bloodline return to the glory of the distant past. Chenyu, you must live on. Heaven extinguishing abyss. A burning blood, moon, shine down. A cold and gloomy purple eye locked onto Chenyu. Chenyu looked up. In his eyes, a complete phantom of the sky-split jade annulus appeared. At this moment, his entire aura thoroughly changed. Dignified, powerful, like an ancient spiritual god awakening from a deep slumber. Inviolable, disdainful, the figure in the burning blood moon let out a soft cry. His blood-colored eyes were filled with endless shock. This aura, the purple eye, was indifferent and emotionless. But at this time, its icy cold pupils were fiercely contracting. They were both existences that had stepped through the world barrier and had the qualifications to step into the great desolate. They could naturally sense just how terrifying this aura was. This feeling was as if they were facing a ruler. Ruler! The blood moon and the curse I both cried out in their hearts. Could it be that this junior that wasn't even worth mentioning was someone that some ruler had taken a liking to? If this weren't the case, how could there be such a terrifying power supporting his body? Regret and fear instantly rushed into their hearts. Without hesitation, the two of them lowered their heads and admitted their mistakes. Little friend, please wait. Today was only a misunderstanding. In their eyes, face, and whatnot weren't worth mentioning at all. Moreover, facing someone that had been chosen by a ruler, it was normal for them to lower their heads. But unfortunately, things weren't as they imagined. Chenyu had used the final strength of the sky-piercing jade wall. So how could he not use it? He lifted a hand, and a sun and moon descended above his head. They were vast and boundless, as if they were a true sun and silver moon. Endless, radiant, divine light erupted. As the light of the sun and moon fused together, a phantom appeared. But this time, the strength that Chenyu used was far too great, so great that it surpassed a certain limit. So after this phantom paused for a brief moment, it began to rapidly solidify at a speed visible to the naked eye. Blood Moon and the curse I were scared witless as they saw this. They screamed and prepared to leave. But now, as that phantom solidified, the entire heaven-eradicating abyss was completely sealed off. Everything was suppressed, and even the fluctuations of the rules vanished from sight. There was a surprised gasp. The figure in the interweaving sun and moon seemed a bit surprised and a bit helpless. He glanced at Chenyu and said, "Just how long has it been? And you've actually woken me up again? What a troublesome little fellow. I'm a bit regretful that I accepted you as my disciple." Her voice wasn't low, but as long as she didn't want to speak, no one could hear her. It was just like how even though a wisp of her true spirit had arrived, no one could clearly see her appearance. She glanced at Blood Moon and the Curse Eye, who were frozen in place, a bored look in her eyes. "So you were frightened by these two little fellows. To think that you would wake me up because of this. You really deserve a beating. I'll remember this beating for now. We'll talk about it later. However, since you dared to touch my disciple, although your crime isn't worthy of death, you should at least leave behind something. Consider it a lesson." She lifted a hand and slashed forwards. Bang, bang. In the skies above, whether it was the burning Blood Moon or the demonic Purple Eye, neither of them emitted a single sound. Under this casual slash, they disintegrated. In the next moment, she turned and vanished from sight. The shadows of the sun and moon were extinguished with her, and all fluctuations between the heavens and earth returned to silence. Qin Yu blinked his eyes. He felt as if something had happened just now, something he didn't know about, as if he had been glared at, but who was it that glared at him? Whatever, although it was a bit strange, at least the result wasn't bad. This was truly worthy of being a jade embryo egg. Even if it was the last bit of its strength, it was still boundless and terrifying. With a single slash, it had cleanly cut apart Blood Moon, Purple Eye, and everything else. Qin Yu could feel that the cold energy that wrapped around his body had completely vanished. He didn't know if it had been completely cut apart by this slash, or if the Blood Moon and Cursed Eye had been frightened and retracted on their own. Of course, no matter what the reason was, the result was perfect. But Qin Yu soon discovered that things were even more perfect than he had imagined. This was because the Blood Moon and Purple Eye that had been cut apart hadn't completely vanished. To be more specific, after the Blood Moon and the Eye of the Curse were killed, they each left something behind. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. Could it be that these almighty beings needed to use some sort of medium to cross through space and descend? Otherwise, how could there be two that fell at the same time? If this was the case, it really didn't match their status. It was quite degrading. Or was there something wrong with these two things? One was a small purple eye. If he didn't look carefully, he would have thought it was a purple jade bead. The other was even simpler. It was a small, blood-red stone. Qin Yu carefully sensed it. The sun and moon force field wrapped around it. When he didn't sense anything wrong, he carefully picked it up. It wasn't that he was timid. Rather, when it came to existences like the Blood Moon and Cursed Eye, he couldn't be too cautious. Otherwise, if something went wrong, he could inexplicably lose his life. But immediately, Qin Yu's eyes brightened. He looked at the jade bead and stone in his hand, a look of joy on his face. He thought that these two were truly worthy of their status as almighty beings. Even though they had been cut down, they still left behind such treasures. This breadth of mind, this bearing, it was hard not to give them a thumbs up. They were simply role models. The small purple eye that was shaped like a jade bead came from the Cursed Eye. It was a dual-use treasure. After refining it, not only could it resist the invasion of the curse, but it could also summon the power of the Cursed Eye. Of course, there were great limitations to this summoning. After using it, the eye's strength would be completely exhausted. It would need to be reaccumulated before it could be used again. The blood-red stone naturally came from the Blood Moon. Or, to be more precise, it was a part of the Blood Moon. The Blood Moon referred to the true blood-red moon that hung above his head, not a person's name. It was only at this moment that Qin Yu learned that the Blood Moon really did exist in this world. As for its function, it was simple and crude. It could cause the Blood Moon to descend once and help the user overcome a crisis. The descent of the Blood Moon, moreover, it was the true Blood Moon. Even if it wasn't the main body, one didn't need to be a genius to know that it was incomparably terrifying. The flaw was that this stone could only be used once. Afterwards, it would be taken back by the Blood Moon. But this was already precious enough. He had used the last of the Jade Egg strength and lost one of his strongest cards. But he had obtained the Purple Eye and the Blood Moon Stone. This could be considered making up for it. Qin Yu flipped his hand and put away the two treasures. Then he took a deep breath and shot up into the skies. Without hesitation, he flew straight towards the stone coffin that had been cut in half. Sweeping his eyes around, he found a crystal within. This crystal was dark red, as if it had absorbed a massive amount of blood. Looking at it, he could feel the formidable strength contained within. Suddenly, a distorted face appeared on the surface of this crystal. It roared as it tried to rush out, but it was firmly imprisoned within. Qin Yu's pupils shrank. His senses weren't wrong. This stone coffin had its own secrets. The reason that the blood moon was able to borrow the stone coffin to reform its body and even conceal itself from the senses of the sun, and the sun should be because of this object. At this time, Qin Yu's complexion changed. The primordial spirit mark in his palm began to heat up. Before he could respond, the distorted face sealed within the stone coffin suddenly stopped howling, revealing a look of endless fear. As if it could feel some terrifying crisis, it suddenly vanished from sight, hiding within the crystal. Do you think you can escape like this? Don't be so naive. My luck is just too good to be able to survive such a great calamity. A rueful voice sounded out from behind him. Qin Yu stiffened for a moment before relaxing. He turned around, his complexion grim. Chapter 976. Shuizhen coughed. Virtuous little brother, please don't misunderstand. My injuries are so serious that they have reached my foundation. So how could I possibly maintain my consciousness? It's only because I discovered something that can heal my injuries that I forcefully woke up. He lifted a hand and pointed. This crystal is a good thing. Virtuous little brother, hurry up and put it away. You can refine it by dripping a drop of blood on it. Then I ask virtuous little brother to hurry up and take out the remnant soul inside so that I can extend my life. Qin Yu narrowed his eyes. You aren't lying to me? Shuizhen's face turned green. Virtuous little brother, my current state is because I have used some secret technique that can only be maintained for a short period of time. If you don't do anything, then I really will die. I have lived for endless years and have enjoyed all that I can. But, virtuous little brother, you are still young and have a bright future ahead of you. So how could you be implicated by me? What he meant was, hurry up and stop blabbering. Otherwise, if I end up in bad luck, you won't have a good time either. Qin Yu lightly said, Are you threatening me? Shuizhen cupped his hands together and bowed. In the beginning, I had no choice but to do so. Virtuous little brother, please rest assured that once I restore my cultivation in the future, I will definitely give you a satisfactory reward. Qin Yu coldly snorted. Right now, he and Shuizhen were both going to suffer, so he naturally wouldn't allow anything to happen to him. Moreover, he could feel that Shuizhen had no ill intentions towards him. He lifted a hand and grasped forwards. The crystal in the coffin fell into his palm. He flicked a drop of blood onto it, and it was instantly absorbed. The crystal trembled, and a connection immediately appeared. Qin Yu immediately knew what this object was. Joy flashed in his eyes. With a thought, a mass of gray gas appeared. It screamed and tried to flee. Shuizhen was ready for battle. Seeing this, he laughed out loud. My life-saving medicine, where do you think you are going? Obediently come in. He opened his mouth and swallowed. The gray gas was immediately pulled to his side. It split into 7 strands that flowed through his head and into his body, as if he had eaten a great supplement pill. Shuizhen closed his eyes. His body shivered, and a comfortable expression appeared on his face. His pale complexion began to redden at a speed visible to the naked eye. His empty aura began to rapidly expand. Qin Yu immediately felt an incomparably powerful oppressive aura. It was like a heavenly pillar was about to fall onto his body. He furrowed his eyebrows for a moment before regaining his composure. He grasped the crystal in his hand and calmly looked at Shuizhen, who had his eyes closed and was deep in thought. After several breaths of time, with several light coughs, Shuezheng opened his eyes and looked at Qinyu. He curled his lips and said, "How boring. I can't even scare you, brat." Qinyu lightly said, "I hope that Big Brother will keep his word and not be someone who breaks his promise." Shuezheng loudly slapped his chest. "Virtuous little brother, rest assured. Once you make it through today's calamity, I will protect you in all matters in the future. I will absolutely allow you to live a carefree and happy life." Qinyu turned and walked away. "Then I must thank Big Brother." With that, he arrived at the giant ball that the dragon beast had spat out before it died. He took a look inside and frowned. "Xiaoyu, how are you?" The little dragon warily glanced at Qinyu, but for some unknown reason, its expression soon relaxed. It opened its mouth and swallowed. The amber object that sealed the entire cave was like a gas that rapidly submerged into its mouth. With a loud burp, the little dragon beast lay down beside the unconscious Lei Xiaoyu. It roared at Qinyu, telling him to hurry and save its beautiful big sister. Qinyu glanced at it. He squatted down and placed the crystal between Lei Xiaoyu's eyebrows. With a thought, dark red blood energy immediately flowed out and fused into Lei Xiaoyu's body. At this time, Lei Xiaoyu's body was much thinner. Her complexion was deathly pale and her aura was extremely weak. As this blood energy fused into her, a happy cry sounded out from her body and her aura stabilized. Even her thin body began to rapidly recover. This was because at this time, what was fusing into her body was original spirit, blood essence. The other blood moon that Qinyu had cut down with his sword had perished. Its blood essence and remnant soul had been directly absorbed by the crystal. Seeing her like this, Qinyu relaxed a little. Although this trip to Heaven Extinguishing Abyss had been dangerous, it had still been filled with harvests. Not only had Shuezheng awakened, but it seemed that not only would Lei Xiaoyu be able to continue living, but she would also be able to obtain a great harvest from this disaster. It had to be known that the goo insects in her body were not ordinary things. Once they matured, not only would they be harmless to their host, but they would also become a great help. At this point, everything seemed to be perfect, but accidents often occurred when everything seemed perfect and perfect. Moreover, they often came without warning, breaking apart everything. Just like now, bang! As the Heaven Extinguishing Abyss was fading away, it was like it had been struck by a heavy fist. The speed at which it dissipated increased by more than 10 times. Shuezheng, who had been smiling happily as he watched Qinyu save the others, had an expression that said, "My little brother is truly pure and kind. I didn't misjudge you." But now it was like he had been bitten by a dog. He leapt 100 feet into the air and blurted out, "You peach girl, are you done yet? Do you really want to kill me? If it was just eating a few peaches, your punishment would have been more than enough. But one of the peach trees in my orchard was killed by you." A cold and indifferent voice echoed through the world. The temperature suddenly plummeted, as if it would freeze the void. "Kacha! Kacha!" All around Shuezheng, a heart-chilling, shattering sound rang out. As he heard this, his complexion darkened. He clenched his teeth and roared, "It was clearly you who chased me, causing the peach tree to be destroyed. You are also responsible for the peach girl. Even if I bear half of it, you will still die." "Nonsense. Is my life not as precious as a broken peach tree of yours?" Shuezheng clenched his teeth. "Let me tell you, don't go too far. Otherwise, even if I put my life on the line, you might not have a good ending. Then I will be looking forward to it." In the old site of Heaven Eradicating Abyss that had been swept clean, a giant illusion of a peach tree suddenly appeared. It floated between the heavens and the earth, its extremely developed roots intertwining with the thick canopy that covered the sky. It was impossible to see the end of it. Endless pressure and aura were released from it, as if the entire world had been sealed away. Countless pink peach blossoms fell down, gathering in midair. Finally, they formed the figure of a woman, her eyes indifferent as she looked at him. At this moment, It was like a million bolts of thunder exploded in Qin Yu's mind. He looked at the woman in front of him, all of his thoughts torn to shreds. How was this possible? How was this possible? Because this woman in front of him was exactly the same as Ningling. It wasn't just their appearance that was similar, but the feeling Qin Yu felt was completely the same. But what was terrifying was that Qin Yu was sure that this woman in front of him wasn't Ningling, because in her eyes he didn't exist at all. How could this be? To Shuezheng, to Ningling, there was definitely a problem here. There was no reason at all. Qin Yu's intuition told him that he had discovered an extremely cruel truth. Shuezheng, be buried with my peach tree. The woman lifted a hand, and the peach tree phantom behind her gently trembled. An unimaginably terrifying aura swept out, blotting out the skies. Shuezheng's back was as straight as a pine tree. He reared his head back and angrily roared, "If that's the case, then let us fight to the death!" But at this time, Qin Yu heard his pitiful screams again and again. "I'm dead, I'm dead. That crazy peach planting woman. She actually chased after me so quickly. It seems she's serious. Good brother. She doesn't know our relationship, so I don't think she will make things difficult for you. I'm about to flee for my life. Our mountains are high and rivers are far away. We will meet again in the future." Just as the peach planting woman was about to attack and Shuezheng was about to flee, Lei Xiaoyu slowly opened her eyes after absorbing her origin, spirit, blood, energy. At this time, a beetle phantom appeared between her eyebrows. It shook its wings and then calmed down, as if it had fallen into a deep slumber. This beetle was shaped like a water droplet, and its body was covered with runes that adorned the space between her eyebrows. It didn't seem strange at all, but rather added to its beauty. The peach planting woman furrowed her eyebrows. She slowed down her movements and turned to look at Qin Yu. Her eyes didn't stop on Qin Yu. Instead, they fell onto Lei Xiaoyu. Deep in her indifferent eyes, there was a fluctuation. In the next moment, a ring on her finger suddenly emitted a bright light. A middle-aged Taoist walked out. The moment Shuezheng saw this Taoist, all the blood drained from his face. His legs couldn't help but shiver. This, you can't bully me like this. I can't even defeat the young one, and now even the old one has come. I'm done for. I can't even run away." Although this was only a projection, facing this middle-aged Taoist, Shuezheng had already fallen into a deep despair. But at this time, the middle-aged Taoist's attention wasn't on him. His eyes turned to Lei Xiaoyu, who had just woken up. A happy light flashed in his eyes. After looking at her several times, he turned and said, "Little Tao, can you sense it?" The peach planting woman slowly nodded. "Yes." The middle-aged Taoist laughed. "I thought it had gone extinct, but I never thought I would find it here. This is truly the luck of the heavens." As he looked at Lei Xiaoyu, his eyes filled with warmth. Even his tone softened. "Little girl, I don't want to lie to you. The goo insect in your body is of great use to me. If you are willing, I will receive you as my disciple today and send you a bright future." Shuezheng blinked his eyes. He suddenly felt as if he had just survived a calamity. As he looked at the dazed Lei Xiaoyu, he couldn't help but shout out, "Little girl Lei, no, Miss Lei, what are you standing there for? The person in front of you is the Peach Blossom Spring Master, one of the most formidable existences in the world. To become his disciple is the dream of countless people. Hurry up and agree. Little girl, only if you agree will I be able to bask in your glory and survive. Don't try to be stubborn, or you will really die." Lei Xiaoyu didn't know Shuezheng at all, so she naturally wouldn't listen to him. Moreover, she had just woken up and her mind was still a bit hazy. She subconsciously looked at Qin Yu. "Big brother Qin." Qin Yu took a deep breath and tried to appear as calm as possible. He slowly said, "Agree. This is the lucky chance of your life." Lei Xiaoyu trusted Qin Yu unconditionally. Although she didn't know who this middle-aged Taoist was, he seemed very strong. She immediately knelt to the ground and bowed. "Lei Xiaoyu greets, honorable master." "Ha ha ha. The peach blossom, spring master laughed. He was clearly in a good mood. Your master is the peach blossom spring master. If anyone dares to bully you in the future, feel free to tell them. He raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. Little girl Lei, come with your master. Lei Xiaoyu wanted to say something, but Qin Yu shot her a look to stop her. She immediately shut up and obediently allowed herself to be brought to his side. The peach blossom, spring master glanced at Qin Yu. He only treated him as a relative of Lei Xiaoyu and didn't care too much about him. His gaze then fell on Shuezheng. Let's not talk about your previous actions. Just what you said just now is a crime deserving of 10,000 deaths. However, you also played a part in finding Xiaoyu this time. I will let bygones be bygones, but if there is a next time, I will destroy your body and soul. With a flick of his sleeves, he, the peach blossom woman, and Lei Xiaoyu disappeared. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but when the peach blossom woman left, her gaze seemed to pause on Qin Yu's face for a moment. But in the end, she left just like that. Qin Yu could no longer maintain his calm expression. He revealed a gloomy expression and said in a low voice, Elder brother Shuezheng, I have a question. I hope that you will answer me truthfully. Chapter 977. I, Shuezheng, am truly blessed by the heavens. I was able to safely pass through such a great calamity. My future is destined to be bright and resplendent. Shuezheng was admiring himself from the bottom of his heart and hadn't yet sobered up from his excitement. But as soon as he heard Qin Yu speak, he waved his hand and said, Virtuous brother, please speak freely. As long as I know, I will tell you everything I know. In the end, the reason he was able to survive was all because of Lei Xiaoyu, and the reason he was able to do so was because of Qin Yu. Indeed, this good brother of mine is my lucky star. Not only did he save me from awakening, but he also ensured my safety. In the future, I must treat him with sincerity and get closer to good brother. Qin Yu took a deep breath. May I ask, big brother, why do you look exactly the same as an old friend I knew in my early years? Not just that, but your aura is the same. Across from him, Shuezheng's complexion froze. His eyes widened. Where is that person? Qin Yu's heart sank. This really wasn't a coincidence. He suppressed his tumbling emotions and cupped his hands together. I ask big brother to answer my question first. Shuezheng's expression was cloudy and uncertain. He hesitated. It's not that I don't want to tell you. This matter cannot be casually spoken about. Heaven eradicating abyss, shattered and dissipated. The cultivators that had luckily survived had now regained their freedom. With the sound of breaking air, several figures flew over. Among them were Mo Yuan, Li Hongye, and the others. There were also some other cultivators watching from afar, awe in their eyes. Qin Yu frowned. He turned and saw Mo Yuan, Li Hongye, and the others flying over. Big brother, let's talk somewhere else. He couldn't care too much about this right now. He grabbed Shuezheng and vanished from sight. Mo Yuan paused. She looked in the direction Qin Yu left in, and the light in the depths of her eyes dimmed. He had left like this without even saying a word. Did he have something else to do, or did he not want to come into contact with them any longer? At this moment, Mo Yuan's heart was empty, as if something very important had been taken away from her. Li Hongye pursed her lips. Her expression was faint, but there was a bit of bitterness in her eyes. After today's parting, she didn't know if they would ever meet again. Qin Yu wasn't even willing to give her a chance to apologize. As for the other cultivators, they actually relaxed upon seeing this. Otherwise, they really wouldn't know just what position they should face Qin Yu from. Now they were much more at ease. Space twisted. Qin Yu and Shuezheng stepped out. Qin Yu said in a low voice, Big brother, can we speak now? Shuezheng bitterly smiled. Little brother, just now I didn't care that there were people nearby. With my cultivation, if I didn't want them to hear, I naturally have my ways. After a moment of hesitation, he raised his hand and pointed to the sky. What you're asking about involves a great secret. I once swore that I would never divulge even the slightest bit of it. If I divulge it, it will definitely be sensed by the heavens and earth, and the consequences will be endless. Qin Yu earnestly looked at Xue Zheng's expression. He judged that Xue Zheng wasn't lying. His thoughts stirred, and the sun-moon field expanded, wrapping around him. Xue Zheng gawked. He was at the original God realm. Although his cultivation base hadn't recovered completely, his soul consciousness was still there. Of course, he could sense the changes around him. An invisible force wrapped around him, isolating him from the outside world. He couldn't even sense the existence of laws. Luckily, this force wasn't too strong. As long as he wanted to, he could easily break free. Otherwise, if he was sucked in, he would be trampled upon by others. Even so, this method of isolating the perception of the world was still incomparably powerful. Moreover, Xue Zheng could faintly feel an invisible suppression. "Little brother, what is this?" Qin Yu didn't answer. "Big brother, can you speak now?" Xue Zheng deeply looked at him. Although they had been together for many days, he still couldn't see through Qin Yu's background. But without a doubt, there were many secrets on his little brother's body. It wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface. Moreover, he didn't know why, but he always had a premonition that the weak Qin Yu today would have great achievements in the future. After several breaths of silence, Xue Zheng let out a breath. He slowly said, "Little brother, have you heard the rumors about the myriad soul path?" Qin Yu shook his head. "I ask Big Brother to enlighten me." Cultivating the great Tao is difficult and arduous. The higher the boundary, the more difficult it is to take a step forward. Even a heaven-gifted genius will have their own limits. Once you touch it, you will be stuck in a bottleneck. No matter how many methods you have, you will never be able to take another step forwards. This is the extreme of the great Tao. Because every cultivator is different, the extreme of the great Tao is also different. Most people find it difficult to step into the divine realm in their entire lives, and a small number stop at the original divinity realm. But there is also an extremely small number who inherit the destiny of the world and possess infinite potential or heaven-defying lucky chances. Because of this, they are able to touch upon a higher boundary. For instance, Blood Moon, the Eye of Curse, and even the Peach Blossom Origin Master. These words actually revealed some information. For instance, Xue Zheng had said that his consciousness was in a deep slumber. This was clearly false. But at this time, Qin Yu wasn't in the mood to care about these things. He nodded, indicating for Xue Zheng to continue. Xue Zheng revealed a look of reverence. He continued to say, "These almighty beings were incomparably strong, so they naturally had greater ambitions. After touching upon the extreme of the great Tao, they weren't willing to sink into depravity. Thus, they began to think of ways to attack a higher boundary. I don't know how many years have passed, and I don't know which amazing senior it was, but after countless attempts, he finally found a method similar to gathering the power of all living beings to break through to the supreme realm. This method was called the myriad soul Tao. Using an arcane technique, one could split their own soul and turn half of it into 10,000 soul seeds. Then, following the power of samsara, they would scatter into the boundless infinite worlds. 10,000 soul seeds are equivalent to 10,000 lives, opening up countless possibilities. Although there are some soul seeds that perish due to accidents, causing their souls to become incomplete, once these soul seeds return to their main body, they will bring with them a tremendous increase in strength. This is the foundation of the myriad soul Tao. Qin Yu's complexion darkened, his eyes filled with shock. Although Xue Zheng hadn't fully explained everything was clear now. Myriad soul Tao, soul seeds. Xue Zheng glanced at him and slowly nodded. As you think, if there isn't an accident, then the friend you speak of should be one of my soul seeds. Thus, not only is his appearance similar to mine, but his aura and all other aspects are exactly the same. Although Chinyu had already guessed this, he still couldn't help but feel his heart violently contract as he heard this. He took a deep breath and said in a hoarse voice, "The relationship between the soul seed and the main body," Shuezheng lightly said. "It is like a farmer and the crops in the field. Once they mature, they naturally have to be harvested. May I ask, Big Brother, if there is a way to sever the relationship between the soul seed and the main body?" Shuezheng was silent for several breaths of time. Then he suddenly said, "Are you asking me this because of that friend of yours?" Chinyu thought for a moment and slowly nodded. "A woman." Shuezheng had an expression that seemed to say that he had already seen through everything, so there was no need to hide anything. The soul seed comes from the main body. Unless the main body is willing to abandon it, there is no way to sever it. Of course, there might be other methods, but I don't know. As he spoke to her, his voice came to an abrupt halt. His eyes widened as he stared at Chinyu. As he thought about how Chinyu had suddenly asked about this and how he had remained silent until now, moreover, it was a woman, Shuezheng, subconsciously gulped. "Good little brother, don't tell me that the woman you care about is the same as the woman who planted the peaches?" Since he had already said it, Chinyu certainly wouldn't hide it anymore. Moreover, he was asking for help, so how could he hide it? Yes. Hearing this word, Shuezheng violently swayed. He rubbed his forehead, feeling dizzy. He wanted to laugh out loud and then say, "Good little brother, don't mess around." But his eyes swept over Chinyu several times. His expression was serious and earnest, without any hint of joking at all. It was true, it was actually true. "I'm done for, I'm done for. Just now I was saying that my good little brother was my lucky star. So how did it change in the blink of an eye? This is the same as trying to drag me into death with him. Moreover, it's the kind of death where not even dregs remain. No, I have to stop my good little brother. No matter what, I cannot do anything stupid. Good little brother Chinyu." Shuezheng lowered his hand and shouted out loud, his expression solemn. "I don't know who that woman is, nor do I want to know what relationship you have with her. But let me tell you, it is best if you bury this matter in your stomach forever and never mention it to anyone in the future. Otherwise you will be in great trouble. No, not great trouble, but you will die a miserable death." Chinyu furrowed his eyebrows together before relaxing them. "She is my wife." "Your wife isn't." Shuezheng's eyes widened. "What are you telling me? I don't want to know at all, so don't say anything more." Looking at Chinyu, he cupped his hands together and bitterly smiled. "My good little brother, I just said that once a soul seed is destroyed, the main body will forever lose a portion of its soul. There is no way to repair this sort of loss. Do you understand? Moreover, the seriousness of this matter isn't just that. This is because your wife is exactly the same as the woman who planted the peaches." Chinyu's complexion changed. "Is the soul seed the same as the main body?" Shuezheng pointed a finger at him. "What happened to your usual cleverness? Just because it involves you, you eat it all up. If the soul seed is the same as the main body, then isn't that telling my enemies that they should hurry up and destroy my soul seed? As long as they can kill them, I will also suffer a great misfortune. If that were the case, then who would fight to the death to cultivate the myriad soul Tao? Everyone wash up and go to sleep." He clenched his teeth and lowered his voice. "If 10,000 soul seeds are scattered throughout the world, they will give birth to 10,000 completely different lives. Whether it is man, beast, monster, or demon, their appearances will naturally be different. But, in a sense, the cultivation method of the myriad soul, Tao, goes against the will of the world. Because of this, it is restricted by the world, and there is a loophole in it. That is, in 10,000 soul seeds, there will be one that is completely identical to the main body. This soul seed is called one's life. If one's life soul seed is destroyed, then the path of cultivating the myriad soul Tao will be severed, and it will be impossible to use it to attack the great Tao. The reason I didn't say it clearly just now is because of this. Moreover, because of an accident in my early years, my cultivation method of the myriad soul Tao was destroyed, so my reaction wasn't too excited. Otherwise, I would have already thought of a way to have you tell me where your friend is. Qin Yu immediately understood why Xue Zheng had lost his composure after hearing this. As he said, in order to release a soul seed, one had to abandon their main body and sever the connection between them on their own initiative. But Ningling was the life soul seed of that woman who planted the peach tree. Once Qin Yu explained this matter, he feared she would immediately attack and suppress Qin Yu, forcing him to reveal Ningling's whereabouts. As for having her sever the connection between her and Ningling, that was naturally impossible. Thinking of this, his heart sank and his complexion became even uglier. Xue Zheng patted his shoulder. Good little brother, do you understand now? That is why I told you to never mention this matter again and never try anything else. Otherwise you will definitely die. Believe me, your current cultivation cannot reach too high a level. But the Peach Blossom Origin Master himself is one of the most formidable existences in the world besides the rulers of the world. That woman who planted the peach tree is his only daughter. If you dare to have any thoughts of harming her, you will die 10,000 times over. Seeing Qin Yu's silence, Xue Zheng thought he had changed his mind. He continued to say, why should a man worry about not having a wife? As for women, as long as you are strong enough, what can't you obtain? Once I restore my cultivation, I will bring good little brother away from this world and let you enjoy your true life. Then everything will be over. Qin Yu remained silent. Time slowly passed. Xue Zheng felt his mouth go dry and his expression stiffen. Good little brother, don't be stupid. Chapter 978. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. Dragging Big Brother into this matter is my mistake. I ask Big Brother not to blame me. Although he didn't answer, his words in themselves represented a certain answer. Xue Zheng clenched his teeth and roared. Qin Yu, do you know what you are doing? Qin Yu said, I am clear-headed and I have thought deeply about it. I am not impulsive. I ask Big Brother to help me. Help you? Help you die and then drag me down with you? Xue Zheng sneered and looked at him. Aren't you worried that I will kill you to silence you? As long as you die, I won't be drawn into this great calamity again. Qin Yu shook his head. I believe Big Brother won't do that. He cupped his hands together and deeply bowed. I know nothing about the myriad soul Tao. I ask Big Brother to point me in the right direction. No matter what happens in the end, Qin Yu will remember Big Brother's kindness and I will repay you in the future. For some unknown reason, seeing Qin Yu's solemn appearance, Xue Zheng's heart stirred. He had an impulse to nod and agree. Vaguely, his intuition told him that Qin Yu's promise was incomparably important to him. How could this be? Could this boy really grow into an existence strong enough to protect him in the future? An original God Realm cultivator was considered an absolute powerhouse throughout the myriad heavens. Their minds were connected to the world and they wouldn't act on a whim for no reason. There had to be a reason for a thought to move. Xue Zheng hesitated, but he could see the firmness in Qin Yu's eyes. Even if he didn't help him, Qin Yu wouldn't give up. Only if he did as he said and cut down Qin Yu, and now would he be able to stay out of this mess. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to avoid this storm. This was something that had been decided the moment he told Qin Yu about the myriad soul Tao. Qin Yu, if something happens to you in the future, don't regret today's decision. Xue Zheng rubbed the point between his eyebrows, thinking that he must have gone insane. He glanced at Qin Yu and said in a low voice, as for the method to undo the myriad soul Tao, besides my true self severing myself, I really don't know of any other way. You will need to search for it yourself. I can only tell you one direction that might lead you to this method. Qin Yu cupped his hands together and bowed. Thank you, Big Brother. Xue Zheng bitterly smiled. Don't thank me yet. Let me finish quickly, lest I regret it later and change my mind. He glanced at Qin Yu. In truth, you have already intersected with the myriad soul path. It's just that you didn't know about it. Qin Yu's mind stirred. He immediately thought back to everything that had happened in the Obum Weave. 9 Nether Peak? Shuezheng nodded. That stronghold master is a girl from the Eastern Zhou clan. Her name is Eastern Zhou Jolly. She participated in the competition for a spot in the Myriad Soul Dao. Since you helped her defeat her opponent, she will soon enter the Myriad Soul Dao when it opens. If you can get to Eastern Zhou before then and gain her approval, you can become Eastern Zhou's follower. He paused for a moment, then continued. Followers are qualified to enter the Myriad Soul Dao with her. I can only guide you up to this point. I'm not sure what to do next, and whether or not you'll gain anything. You can only rely on your own luck. Qin Yu took a deep breath and cupped his hands together. Thank you, big brother. Although Shuezheng didn't say much more, the news he told Qin Yu was incomparably important. Right now, the only way Qin Yu could come into contact with the Myriad Soul Dao was through Eastern Zhou Jolly. But the premise was that he had to know this. Otherwise, no matter how much effort he put in, it would all be useless. Cough. Shuezheng coughed, an awkward look on his face. Good little brother, I was originally prepared to show you around this vast and carefree world. But unfortunately, my injuries have yet to recover, and I will need some time to recuperate. Qin Yu said, Big brother, recovering from your injuries is more important. I can deal with what happens next by myself. However, I must ask Big Brother to tell me how I can reach the place where the Eastern Zhou clan is located. Shuezheng was overjoyed. He hurriedly said, This matter is simple. I will give good little brother a directional boundary-breaking talisman. When good little brother goes there, you only need to activate it and you'll be able to directly cross space and enter the world where the Eastern Zhou clan is located. He lifted a hand and took out a jade archive. His hands formed a law, formula, and countless golden runes appeared in the void. The runes were large in the middle and small on both ends, surrounding the jade archive. Condense! With a loud shout, all the runes held forth, submerging into the jade archive. Its clean and transparent surface suddenly shimmered with a golden light. Countless motes of light flickered within, as if it were a miniature version of a golden starry sky, incomparably mystical. Shuezheng's complexion was a bit pale. It seemed that creating this boundary-breaking talisman had consumed a great deal of strength. He let out a deep breath. Good little brother, put it away. When you want to use it, you only need to pour in a bit of your strength. Qin Yu received it with both hands. Thank you, big brother. Shuezheng dryly laughed. Good little brother, I am in a hurry to go into seclusion and cultivate, so I won't stay here any longer. We will meet again in the future. Farewell, big brother. Qin Yu bowed. With a thought, he withdrew the sun-moon force field. Shuezheng turned and left. With a single step, he vanished from sight. From his appearance, it seemed as if he wanted to avoid Qin Yu. Qin Yu had a calm expression. He didn't feel any dissatisfaction towards Shuezheng's decision to leave. To seek advantages and avoid disadvantages was a human instinct. Moreover, once he was discovered, he would die without a doubt. In this situation, it was already rare that Shuezheng didn't turn hostile and instead told him about East Zhou Buddhist pair. Qin Yu was satisfied. He turned his hand and carefully put away the boundary-breaking talisman. Although he wanted to immediately use it to search for East Zhou Buddhist pair, there were still some matters he needed to deal with in this world. For instance, Lei Xiaoyu's matter. He had to give Lei Qianjun an explanation, and there was also Myriad Sword Mountain. He had promised Lin Yan that he would make a trip there. He would finish these matters as soon as possible and then immediately rush to the East Zhou family. With his thoughts settled, Qin Yu stepped forwards and howled into the distance. His first stop was Rock City. Relatively speaking, it was the simplest. He might have to kill people on his trip to Myriad Sword Mountain, so he might as well leave that for later. Heaven eradicating abyss collapsed and dissipated. The remaining surviving cultivators all ran out, their faces filled with joy and fear after surviving a calamity. On that day, less than a fifth of the cultivators that had entered were still alive. The remaining people were buried within. As this news spread out, it set off massive waves in the world. As this news spread out at an astonishing speed, the carriage pulled by the old horse and lame horse was already far away from heaven, eradicating abyss. Banbu turned his head and looked at the tightly shut carriage door behind him. Although Qin Yu's expression was calm, he could still feel the heavy aura emanating from his master. Lei Xiaoyu hadn't come out yet. Was it because of this? He was a bit curious, but he wouldn't say anything. He turned around and focused on driving. What about Xiaoyu? Xiang Shui asked after hesitating for a long time. Qin Yu didn't open his eyes. Don't worry, she is still alive. It's just that she has encountered some other lucky chance and will naturally return in the future. Xiang Shui furrowed her eyebrows. Then, did you encounter some other problem? Qin Yu nodded. He looked at her and thought for a moment. Before long, I will be leaving this world. Are you willing to come with me? Xiang Shui's eyes widened. It was clear that Qin Yu's words had left a great impact on her. To shatter the void and open up a path to another world was an existence that only existed in the legends. But it was clear that Qin Yu's words weren't a joke. She took several deep breaths. Her eyebrows furrowed together, but she remained silent. Qin Yu said, "If you don't want to, you can stay here. Moreover, what I will be doing next will be extremely risky." "I'll go." Xiang Shui suddenly interrupted him. "I no longer have any attachments to this world. If I can go out and take a look at the fabled foreign world, that would be a good choice. I can only think of it as increasing my experience." She stood up and knocked on the carriage door. The carriage soon stopped. "But before that, I need to deal with some personal grudges. Once I'm done, I will naturally come find you." Qin Yu said, "I can help you." Xiang Shui rolled her eyes. "I didn't hear you. This is a personal grudge. Of course, it will only be meaningful if I do it myself. You just need to tell me where to meet up with you." Qin Yu frowned. Although Xiang Shui's expression was casual, there was a firm look in her eyes. It was clear she really didn't want him to interfere. "After leaving Rock City, I will go to Myriad Sword Mountain." Xiang Shui nodded. "I understand." She pushed open the carriage door and bid farewell to Banbu. Then her figure whistled away. Banbu looked back and cautiously said, "My lord." Qin Yu said, "Let's continue on our way." Yes. The carriage continued onwards. The lame horse and the old horse seemed to sense the restless emotions that emanated from Qin Yu's body. They didn't need to be urged to accelerate to the fastest speed possible. 2 days later, Rock City was in sight. Qin Yu ordered Banbu to wait outside. Then he stepped forwards and vanished from sight. City, Lord Mansion. Lei Qianjun was in his study. He frowned, the atmosphere heavy and oppressive, although he had already broken through the Heavenly Execution Division's killing trap. The imperial capital's methods hadn't ended yet. During this time, several accidents had occurred. If it weren't for the fact that he had made ample preparations, Rock City would have already been thrown into chaos. And besides that, what Lei Qianjun worried about the most was Lei Xiaoyu. News that Qin Yu had brought her into heaven, extinguishing abyss, had already reached Rock City. He didn't know what her current condition was, but he hoped that nothing happened to her. At this time, Lei Qianjun's furrowed eyebrows relaxed. He fiercely looked forwards, like a tiger awakening. A terrifying aura broke out from his body. "Who?" With a low roar, the entire interior of the study was instantly suppressed. But what shocked Lei Qianjun was that his all-out suppression had no effect at all. Amidst the spatial fluctuations, a figure appeared. Lei Qianjun took a deep breath. The sound of wind and thunder rose in the air. His robes fluttered even though there was no wind. He was prepared to fight to the death. It wasn't that he was too nervous, but that the intruder's methods had far surpassed his expectations. It had to be known that the City Lord's mansion had long since been activated. His study was even more heavily guarded. The fact that the intruder could directly barge in was already shocking enough. Lei Qianjun naturally didn't dare to be careless. "City Lord Lei, it's me." Hearing this voice, Lei Qianjun's eyes widened. He subconsciously stood up. Sure enough, in the next moment, Qin Yu walked out of the spatial fluctuations. "Qin Yu." He hurriedly turned away from the desk. "Where is the fishman?" "Don't worry, City Lord. She's fine." A moment later, Qin Yu left Rock City and appeared next to the carriage. "Let's go to Myriad Swords Mountain." Ban Bu respectfully nodded and turned his horse around. After a few breaths, he disappeared from sight. Clouds and mist lingered. Dozens of majestic mountains rose steeply from the ground and pierced into the sky. Their auras were fierce and arrogant, like unsheathed swords pointing at the boundless sky. The wind blows clouds was activated. The sound of swords rang in his ears. It was as if the clouds and wind both contained boundless sword intent. Without permission, no living being was allowed to casually step between the dozens of mountains. Otherwise, they would be chopped to pieces. The carriage stopped. After hurrying for so long, the old horse was a bit tired. However, when it turned to look at the lame horse beside it, it neighed lightly and pulled itself together, showing that it was still full of energy. The lame horse rolled its eyes weakly. If it could speak, it would have curled its lips and told it to stop pretending. "My lord, we've arrived." Ban Bu jumped off the carriage and spoke respectfully. Out of the corner of his eyes, he constantly glanced at the majestic mountains in front of him. There was a trace of awe and curiosity in his eyes. Awe because, as a sword cultivator, he naturally knew how powerful Myriad Swords Mountain was. As for curiosity, Ban Bu didn't know why Qin Yu had come here. Could it be that my lord had some other relationship with Myriad Swords Mountain? The carriage door was pushed open from the inside, and Qin Yu stepped out. His eyes flashed, revealing a bit of surprise before understanding dawned on him. It seemed that what Tang Yi said in the past was true. Myriad Swords Mountain did indeed have something related to the Moon Sword. It should have been left here by Leng Yan. Of course, there had to be many stories behind this. Otherwise, why would Leng Yan ask him to come to Myriad Swords Mountain before he died to kill someone for him? As Qin Yu stood outside the gates of Myriad Swords Mountain, his thoughts raced. Because of his appearance, a commotion had been set off within Myriad Swords Mountain. This was because the sword that was inserted into the sword mound, suppressing everything around it, suddenly began to cry out. And as it changed, the trillions of swords within the sword mound resonated with it, setting off a vast and mighty sword cry. All of the cultivators of Myriad Swords Mountain were shocked by this change. In particular, the dozens of new disciples of Myriad Swords Mountain who were outside the sword mound trying to choose their own life sword all spat out a mouthful of blood. Their eyes widened, and besides pain, they were also filled with disbelief. This, just what was going on, let alone them. Even the complexions of the two protectors responsible for guiding the new disciples to choose their life swords changed. Even they had never heard of such a change occurring within the sword mound. Whoosh, whoosh. With the sound of breaking air, 7 figures held forwards, each of them releasing a terrifying aura. Invisible sword intent lingered around their bodies. As they collided with each other, sword cries filled the air. The two protectors hurriedly bowed. "Greetings, Sword Master. Greetings, elders." The shock on their faces was even greater. The Sword Master who had been in seclusion for so many years had actually appeared. As expected, today's matter wasn't ordinary at all. Outside the sword mound, the Myriad Swords Mountain cultivators all knelt to the ground, their faces filled with awe. "Sword Master." Several elders cupped their hands together, their expressions dignified. There was a bit of questioning in their eyes. One of them had a single arm. It was Tang Yi. The Sword Master slowly nodded. "He's back." He turned around, his gaze seeming to pierce through space and fall on the land outside the mountain. Everyone, let's go and welcome them together. Whoosh, whoosh, 7 sword phantoms hurled into the skies, hurtling towards the outside world. Standing in front of the mountain, Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He suddenly said, "Banbu, you are a sword cultivator. Do you know anything about Myriad Swords Mountain?" Ban revealed a look of longing. "When I first formed my way of the sword, I heard that within Myriad Swords Mountain there was a secret sword called the Returning Dragon Sword. It was incomparably powerful. At that time, my greatest wish was to enter Myriad Swords Mountain and study this sword. Unfortunately, my talent was limited and I was ultimately rejected. This is one of the greatest regrets of my life." Returning Dragon Sword. Qin Yu lightly said, "Wait a moment. I will give you the sword formula." Banbu was shocked. Qin Yu didn't speak further. This was because at this time, the fog in front of him had been pierced through, and the 7 sword phantoms were howling towards him. "Qin Yu! Tang!" he cried out, his complexion shaking. The sword master and the others frowned. They swept their eyes over, revealing a bit of scrutiny. It was clear they already knew of his existence. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. "Elder Tang, we meet again." "Tang," he returned the greeting. "To be able to see fellow Taoist Qin again today, I am also very happy." As he spoke, he kept looking towards the carriage. The sword master and the others also looked over. Qin Yu said, "Everyone, there is no need to look. Today, I came alone to help Senior Linyan deal with some unfinished business.